The throne room of Lysander the Exquisite occupied the spire's crown, a chamber that defied architectural logic and offended physics on principle. The ceiling stretched upward into infinity, or perhaps folded back on itself through dimensions human geometry couldn't describe. The walls were alive, breathing, their surfaces covered in skin that ranged from porcelain smooth to scar-textured, each section representing a different victim-turned canvas. The floor was liquid glass that reflected not what stood above it, but what the observer desired most to see. Alucard looked down and saw nothing. The glass showed only darkness, which was either profoundly accurate or profoundly disappointing depending on one's perspective. "Welcome!" Lysander's voice was a symphony. Not metaphorically, actual harmonics layered through every syllable, creating chords that resonated in the listener's bones. "I am delighted you accepted my invitation. Though I confess, the path you took was more destructive than anticipated. 7 guard units. Casimir. You've dismantled 3 decades of work in less than 2 hours." The Chaos Champion sat on a throne constructed from solidified ecstasy, a material that shouldn't exist but did anyway, glowing with internal light that shifted through colors emotion had invented specifically for this purpose. He was beautiful in ways that hurt to perceive. Not handsome, not pretty, but perfected. Every line of his face, every curve of his enhanced musculature, every proportion had been calculated to mathematical ideals and then pushed slightly beyond, into the uncanny valley where perfection became disturbing. His eyes were the worst part. They held genuine intelligence, awareness, and something that might have been sanity, if sanity hadn't been refined into something too pure to survive contact with reality. "Let me guess," Alucard said, his pistols drawn but not yet aimed. "You're going to offer me the same deal your boss did. Join you, become perfected, elevate myself beyond mortal limitations. Maybe throw in some threats about how resistance is futile and suffering is inevitable. Am I missing anything?" "You're missing the entire point," Lysander said, standing with inhuman grace. He descended from his throne, each step a performance. "I'm not here to tempt you with power or threaten you with suffering. I'm here to show you art. The greatest art. The only art that matters. The transformation of flesh and soul into something that transcends both." He gestured, and the throne room's walls shifted. Images formed in the living skin, memories perhaps, or visions of possible futures. They showed Lysander's journey, the young naval officer, disciplined and exemplary. Then the first cracks in that discipline, the pursuit of excellence becoming obsession, the moment when perfection stopped being a goal and became a god. "I was like you once," Lysander continued. "Powerful, confident, certain that I was special, that I could control my appetites rather than be controlled by them. I thought I was the hunter, the apex predator, the one who would never fall." "And then you fell," Alucard finished. "Tragic backstory, very moving. Does it have a point, or are we just establishing your motivation before I kill you?" Lysander's smile was beatific. "The point is that falling is inevitable. Everyone falls." The Emperor fell locked in his golden prison for 10 millennia. The Primarchs fell, half to chaos, half to death or disappearance. Every hero, every champion, every being that reaches for greatness eventually discovers that perfection and damnation are the same destination approached from different angles. "Sounds depressing," Alucard observed. "No wonder you need to dress it up with fancy architecture and artistic torture. Can't just admit you lost a fight with your own ego. Have to pretend it was destiny." The temperature in the throne room spiked. Lysander's perfect features showed the first crack in their composure, a flash of genuine anger that made the walls pulse with sympathetic response. "You mock what you don't understand, but you will. I promise you that." Before this encounter ends, you will understand exactly what I've achieved, what we can achieve together." He raised one hand, and 24 figures emerged from alcoves in the walls. His disciples, his perfected servants, his greatest works. They were masterpieces of biological and demonic augmentation. One had been transformed into living crystal, their body transparent enough to see organs pumping in artistic rhythm. Another had 4 arms, each ending in hands that could create or destroy with equal artistry. A third had no face, just a smooth surface that reflected the viewer's own features back at them, perfected and terrible. But it was the 24th that made even Alucard pause. She had been a space marine once. The ceramite armor fragments still embedded in her transformed flesh testified to that. But she'd been changed, refined. Her transhuman physiology pushed even further beyond human limitation. Her augmented musculature had been reshaped into flowing curves. Her battle-scarred face had been reconstructed into something that married martial severity with impossible beauty. She moved with the deadly grace of the Adeptus Astartes, combined with something more. A predatory elegance that suggested centuries of refinement. "My greatest work," Lysander said with genuine pride. "Sister Captain Meridia of the Order of the Argent Shroud. She came to kill me 30 years ago. Instead, she stayed to be perfected. Now she serves as my champion, my sword, my ultimate expression of what happens when faith encounters transcendence." Meridia's eyes, one still human blue, one replaced with crystalline perfection, fixed on Alucard with the focus of someone evaluating a tactical problem. When she spoke, her voice carried the resonance of someone who'd spent decades chanting battle prayers. "You carry the Emperor's blessings in your ammunition," she said, each word measured. "Blessed silver, sanctified mercury, the faith of 1,000,000 priests concentrated into instruments of death. But you're not one of his servants. You're something else, something that uses his weapons without understanding his sacrifice." "Guilty as charged," Alucard said cheerfully. "I'm a practical atheist. I'll use anyone's god if it makes my bullets work better. No offense intended to your corpse, Emperor." "The Emperor is not dead," Meridia said, her voice carrying absolute conviction despite 30 years of chaos corruption. "He endures. He suffers. He sacrifices himself eternally for humanity's survival. That's what makes him worthy of worship. Not power, but dedication. Something you, eternal and undying, could never comprehend." "Actually," Alucard said, "I comprehend it fine. I just think it's stupid. Suffering isn't sacred just because it's voluntary. Martyrdom isn't noble just because you refuse to stop. Your emperor trapped himself in a gilded coffin and convinced a species to feed him souls forever. Where I come from, we call that bad life choices, not divinity." The throne room erupted. Meridia moved first, her transhuman speed enhanced by decades of Slaaneshi perfection. She crossed 20 meters in less than a second. A power sword materialized in her hand, the blade crackling with corrupted energy that married Imperial technology with demonic enhancement. Alucard fired. The Khasul roared, blessed silver seeking her heart. But Meridia's reflexes were beyond mortal, beyond even standard Astartes. She twisted mid-leap, the round passing millimeters from her torso, and brought her sword down in a strike that could split tanks. Alucard didn't dodge. He took the hit. The power sword carved through his torso from shoulder to hip, the corrupted blade's energy field preventing immediate regeneration. His body came apart into 2 roughly equal pieces that hit the floor with wet sounds. Meridia landed in a perfect combat stance, already tracking for threats from the other disciples. Target neutralized. Regeneration inhibited by demonic. Both halves of Alucard liquefied. The blood and flesh flowed together like conscious liquid, reforming into his complete body in the space between one heartbeat and another. The wound was gone. The blessed ammunition still loaded. and his expression had shifted from theatrical amusement to genuine interest. "Power weapons with demonic enhancement," he said, standing fully restored. "That actually slowed my regeneration by almost 4 seconds. Impressive. Let's see if you can do it again." He moved, not with the overwhelming speed of something supernatural, with the precise economy of a predator who'd perfected efficiency across 5 centuries. The jackal tracked Meridia's position, leading her movement, accounting for transhuman reflexes and predicting her evasion pattern based on Space Marine combat doctrine observed in his previous encounters. The explosive round caught her in the shoulder, detonating through ceramite and demonically enhanced tissue. Her arm came off at the joint, spinning through the air in a spray of blood and sacred oils. She didn't scream. She adapted. The remaining arm brought the power sword around in a reverse grip, turning the loss of a limb into tactical repositioning. The other disciples attacked in concert, their movements synchronized through decades of practice and Slaaneshi blessing. The throne room became a killing floor. Alucard fought all 24 simultaneously, his pistols barking thunder while his body absorbed damage that would have killed a dozen Space Marines. Crystal hands shattered against his skull, blades carved through his limbs, sonic weapons liquefied his organs. Psychic attacks tried to unravel his mind. He regenerated through all of it, burning souls like ammunition, treating his immortality as a tactical resource rather than an unbreakable defense. Each injury cost him. Each regeneration drained his reserves. But he was still standing while the disciples fell one by one. The crystal disciple shattered under sustained gunfire. The 4-armed artist collapsed with holes punched through all 4 shoulders. The faceless reflection was destroyed when Alucard shot it without looking, trusting instinct over sight. Meridia lasted longest. Even with 1 arm, even bleeding from a dozen wounds, she fought with the conviction of someone who'd spent 3 centuries believing the Emperor's will flowed through her blade. She was magnificently, tragically skilled. Alucard shot her remaining knee out from under her. She collapsed but didn't surrender, already trying to rise, power sword still gripped in her remaining hand. "The Emperor protects." "Does he?" Alucard asked, placing the castle's barrel against her forehead. "Because from where I'm standing, he let you get corrupted, turned into a trophy for a Chaos Champion, and you spent 30 years serving the very thing you swore to destroy. If that's protection, I'd hate to see abandonment." "He never abandoned me," Meridia said, her voice steady despite imminent death. "I abandoned him. I chose this. I chose perfection over faith. I chose pleasure over duty. I fell because I was weak, not because he was absent, and even now—" Blood leaked from her mouth, staining her perfected features. "Even now, I know he would forgive me if I asked. That's what makes him God, not power. Mercy." "Then ask," Alucard said simply. "I can't." Tears cut through the blood on her face. "I've gone too far. Done too much. Become too much. There's no redemption for what I've become. No prayer that can cleanse 3 decades of willing service to damnation." "Then you're right. There is no redemption." Alucard pulled the trigger. The blessed round ended Meridia's existence cleanly, mercifully, with none of the drawn-out artistry that Lysander would have preferred. Her body collapsed, and whatever remained of Sister Captain Meridia of the Order of the Argent Shroud finally found rest. Alucard turned to face Lysander, who had watched the entire battle with expressions cycling through fascination, horror, and something approaching respect. "Your greatest work is dead," Alucard said, "along with all the others. So here's my counteroffer to your invitation. You can surrender and I'll make your death quick, or you can fight and I'll make it interesting. Your choice." Lysander stood and his form began to change. Not growing, not mutating, but refining. The Chaos Champion's body shed its mortal limitations like a snake shedding skin. his muscles realigned into impossible configurations. His bones hollowed and reinforced simultaneously. His skin took on properties of both living tissue and tempered steel. This was the true form he'd earned through 3 decades of service to Slaanesh. No longer human, not quite demon, but something between that embodied perfection pursued beyond sanity. "I choose," Lysander said, his voice now layered with harmonic overtones that made reality shudder, "to show you why I am called the Exquisite, why Slaanesh personally blessed my ascension, why I have survived 4 inquisitorial purges and will survive a 5th. He drew a blade that materialized from nothing, or perhaps from everything, from the condensed essence of every perfect moment he'd ever experienced. The weapon hummed with power that made the throne room's living walls scream in sympathy. Come then, vampire. Let me add you to my gallery. Let me show you what happens when art becomes religion and religion becomes flesh." Alucard ejected his spent magazines and loaded fresh ones, the last of Thelm's blessed ammunition. 40 rounds total. Not much against something that had spent 3 decades becoming Slaanesh's masterpiece. Perfect. "Finally," Alucard said, his smile returning to its theatrical width. "Someone who understands the assignment. Let's make this beautiful." They moved simultaneously. The throne room erupted into violence that transcended combat and became performance. Every strike was calculated for aesthetic as much as lethality. Every dodge was artistic. Every wound inflicted was composed like sculpture. Lysander fought with techniques that shouldn't exist, sword forms that violated physics, movements that suggested his body existed in more dimensions than the standard 4. The blessed blade carved reality along with flesh, each strike leaving wounds that resisted healing. Alucard countered with 5 centuries of experience fighting impossible things. His bullets found gaps in Lysander's perfected defense. His movements adapted to sword forms that human martial arts had never conceived. He fought like someone who'd learned that the only way to beat something beyond mortal capability was to stop thinking like a mortal. The battle raged for 7 minutes that felt like hours. Both combatants were reduced to tatters. Alucard's coat shredded, his body carrying wounds that would have killed him permanently if his soul reserves hadn't been burning like stars to keep him functional. Lysander's perfect form marred by bullet holes and burn scars, his transcendent beauty reduced to something more honest and terrible. "You're strong," Lysander gasped, his harmonics fading as exhaustion claimed even his enhanced physiology. "Stronger than anything I've faced, but strength isn't enough. You can kill me, yes, but you cannot kill what I represent. Slaanesh is eternal. The pursuit of perfection is endless. You've won this battle but lost the war, because you'll never stop hunting, never stop fighting, never stop pushing yourself to face greater challenges. That is excess. That is Slaanesh's domain. You serve the Dark Prince whether you acknowledge it or not." "Wrong," Alucard said, placing the Casol's barrel against Lysander's heart. "I hunt because I choose to, because it gives my existence meaning, because I've decided that purpose is found in the struggle, not the victory. That's not excess, that's just being alive, or in my case, alive adjacent. You turned perfection into a god and enslaved yourself to it. I turned hunting into a choice and remained free." "You're still a slave," Lysander whispered, "just to a different master." "Maybe," Alucard admitted. "But at least my chains are honest. I know what I am. You convinced yourself torture was transcendence. There's a difference." He pulled the trigger. The blessed round punched through Lysander's chest, through his perfected heart, and detonated his sternum from the inside. The Chaos Champion's eyes widened, not with pain, but with something that might have been relief. For the first time in 30 years, he was allowed to be imperfect. He was allowed to die. The body collapsed, and the throne room began to collapse with it. The living walls screamed. The liquid glass floor cracked. The architecture that had been sustained by Lysander's presence and Slaaneish's blessing began to fail now that its anchor was gone. "Time to leave," Alucard said to Witness 13, who had somehow survived the entire encounter by hiding behind the throne. "Unless you want to experience what happens when a chaos temple implodes." He ran. The spire's collapse was spectacular. Alucard sprinted through corridors that were actively unmaking themselves, walls reverting from organic tissue to ferrocrete mid-disintegration, floors cracking as the demonic architecture lost cohesion, ceilings raining down sculptures that screamed their final moments before shattering into blessed mundane rubble. The living artworks, the perfected servants, the corrupted infrastructure that Lysander had spent 3 decades building, all of it was failing simultaneously. Behind him, Witness 13 struggled to maintain formation, its anti-grav systems fighting turbulence from warp energy backlash. The servo skull's recording equipment captured everything. The vampire's retreat at superhuman speed, the catastrophic structural failure, the way reality was actively rejecting the space chaos had claimed. "Extraction point in 300 meters," Thelm's voice came through the collar, remarkably calm considering the circumstances. "Thunderhawk is inbound. You have 90 seconds before the entire spire becomes unsalvageable." "Plenty of time," Alucard said, vaulting over a collapsing section of floor that revealed the level below, where cultists were scrambling in panic, their decades of corrupted existence suddenly uncertain as their god-touched sanctuary crumbled around them. He considered stopping to thin their numbers, considered that each one was complicit in Lysander's atrocities, had willingly participated in 3 decades of excess and torture masked as transcendence. But they were already dead. The Inquisition would purge survivors with methodical thoroughness. And more importantly, he was tired. The fight with Lysander had cost him. Not just ammunition, not just the physical toll of regenerating through wounds that would have killed him permanently if they'd been slightly more strategic, but something deeper. His soul reserves were depleted. Not dangerously so, but noticeably. He'd burned through perhaps 200,000 absorbed lives in the past 3 hours. Each regeneration, each resistance to corruption, each moment of refusing Slaaneish's direct attention costing him pieces of his accumulated immortality. It was exhilarating. He hadn't felt genuinely tired in decades. The extraction point was a landing platform jutting from the spire's exterior, 3/4 of the way up. Alucard burst through the access door just as the Thunderhawk screamed past, its assault ramp deploying mid-flight. The timing was insane, either incredibly skilled piloting or incredibly reckless, possibly both. He leaped. For a moment he was airborne, the hive city stretching below him in nauseating verticality. Hundreds of levels of humanity packed into rusty infrastructure, millions of souls who had no idea that several floors up, chaos had been building a temple of excess right above their heads. His hands caught the assault ramp's edge. The Thunderhawk immediately banked hard, pulling away from the spire as structural integrity failed catastrophically. Alucard hauled himself inside as the aircraft accelerated, gravitational forces that would have turned a normal human into paste barely registering. Inside the troop compartment, the inquisitorial retinue waited in tense silence. Thelm sat in the command throne, his expression unreadable. Severina huddled in a corner, her chains still glowing faintly with residual warp exposure. The 2 stormtroopers had weapons ready but not quite aimed, uncertain whether they were retrieving an asset or containing a threat. And in the shadows, the Culexus assassin stood perfectly still, its animus speculum tracking Alucard's every movement. "Target eliminated," Alucard reported, collapsing into a restraint harness with theatrical exhaustion. "Lysander the Exquisite is dead. His disciples are dead. His temple is collapsing. I believe that constitutes mission success, yes?" "Report your status," Thelm commanded, gesturing to Severina. The Psyker extended her warp sight reluctantly, her chains rattling with the effort. Her eyes, covered but somehow still seeing, swept across Alucard's form, reading the spiritual residue that clung to him like psychic radiation. "He's clean," she said finally, her voice edged with disbelief. "Slaaneshi contact throughout. Direct exposure to demonic essence. The Dark Prince itself tried to claim him, but there's no corruption, no taint, no hooks buried in his soul. It's like..." She struggled for metaphor. "Like watching water flow over stone. The chaos was there, pressed against him, offering him everything, but it couldn't find purchase, couldn't sink in. He's the same as when he entered." "Not quite the same," Alucard corrected, examining his shredded coat with mild annoyance. "I'm down about 200,000 souls, my coat is ruined, and I learned that chaos gods get really offended when you turn them down. But in terms of corruption, still pristine, still me, still magnificently free of divine tampering." Thelm studied him with the intensity of someone evaluating a weapon that had just performed beyond specifications while simultaneously proving itself unpredictable. "You consumed a lesser demon, fought a direct aspect of Slaanesh's attention, spent hours exposed to concentrated chaos corruption, and emerged unchanged. That should be impossible." "I'm starting to think impossible doesn't mean much in this universe," Alucard observed. "You have zombies powered by prayer, spaceships that travel through literal hell, an emperor who's been dead but not dead for 10,000 years. My particular brand of impossible is honestly pretty tame by comparison." "Tame," Interrogator Kane muttered. "He calls shooting an aspect of Slaanesh tame." "Did you recover any intelligence?" Thelm asked, steering the conversation back to tactical matters. "Information about other chaos operations, corruption networks, anything useful?" "Lysander was a true believer," Alucard said. "He'd genuinely convinced himself that torture was art and corruption was transcendence. His disciples were the same, willing servants, not coerced victims. As for networks..." He paused, accessing memories absorbed from the brief moment he'd drunk the bloodletter's essence. The demon's knowledge had been fragmented, alien, difficult to parse. But certain things had been clear. "Your chaos gods are playing a game. The great game, they call it. They're not unified. They compete, scheme against each other, use mortals as pieces on a board that spans galaxies. Lysander was one piece, probably not an important one. In the grand scheme, every piece matters when the game is eternal," Thelm said quietly. "You removed one of Slaanesh's champions. That will have consequences, ripples. The Dark Prince does not forgive insult easily." "Good," Alucard said. "Let it be insulted. Let it scheme revenge. Let it send something even more dangerous next time. That's the entire point." Severina's chains rattled violently. "You want chaos to target you specifically? You understand what that means? The attention of the dark gods is a death sentence. They're patient, eternal, and they never stop. They will corrupt you, claim you, or destroy you. Those are the only outcomes when gods take personal interest in mortals." "I'm not mortal," Alucard pointed out, "not in any conventional sense. And I've got 5 centuries of experience dealing with things that thought they were unkillable gods. Spoiler alert, they were wrong." The Thunderhawk shuddered as it gained altitude, putting distance between itself and Spire decadence. Through the viewport, the spire was visible as a collapsing monument, entire sections falling away, fires spreading through levels that had been sustained by warp energy, the structure folding in on itself like a dying organism. "Structural failure complete," the pilot reported through Vox. "Spire decadence is compromised beyond recovery. Recommend immediate evacuation of adjacent structures." "Denied," Thelm said coldly. "Seal the district. No one leaves until we've purged every potential carrier of corruption. I want Adeptus Arbites sweeping every level, questioning every survivor, executing anyone who shows signs of taint. This is a Thorian purge. Nothing survives except documented purity. That's tens of thousands of people, Kane said carefully. Most of them had no direct contact with Lysander's cult. They were just living in adjacent districts. And proximity to chaos is itself corruption, Thelm said flatly. Better to execute 1,000 innocents than let one corrupted soul spread their taint. The Emperor's justice is harsh because the alternative is annihilation. Issue the orders, Interrogator. I want this district cleansed by dawn. Kane nodded and began transmitting commands. Alucard watched this exchange with interest, noting the casual calculation of mass execution, the mathematics of acceptable losses, the certainty that genocide was preferable to risk. You're going to kill tens of thousands of your own citizens, Alucard observed. Just because they lived near a chaos cult they probably didn't even know existed. That seems excessive even by my standards. Your standards are irrelevant, Thelm said. You're not human. You don't understand what chaos corruption means for a species. One infected soul can damn a billion. One corrupted thought can metastasize into planetary heresy. We don't have the luxury of mercy or careful investigation. We have only the choice between ruthless prevention and total extinction. Grim, Alucard said. But I suppose that's the dark in Grimdark. Tell me, Inquisitor, do you ever wonder if the cure is worse than the disease? If killing millions to prevent corruption just creates a different kind of hell? Thelm's expression was stone. Every day. But I execute my duty anyway because someone has to make the hard choices. Someone has to do the Emperor's work even when it means damning their own soul in the process. That's what an Inquisitor is. Someone willing to be the monster that hunts monsters, knowing that they'll likely become indistinguishable from what they fight. Huh, Alucard said thoughtfully. You know, that's the most honest thing anyone in this universe has said to me. Everyone else wraps their monstrosity in faith and doctrine. But you know what you are. You're just doing it anyway because the alternative is worse. I can respect that. I don't want your respect, Thelm said. I want your continued service. You eliminated a Chaos champion that survived 4 previous purge attempts. That demonstrates value. Despite my reservations, despite every instinct telling me you're a disaster waiting to happen, I'm going to recommend you for continued deployment as an inquisitorial asset. Alucard raised an eyebrow. Continued deployment. Does that come with benefits, dental, a retirement plan? It comes with targets, Thelm said. Chaos cultists, demon summoners, renegade psychers, alien infiltrators, things that need to die and have proven resistant to conventional elimination. You hunt them. I point you in the right direction and ensure you don't go rogue. That's the arrangement. And if I refuse? Then you become a target yourself, Thelm said simply. An uncontained supernatural entity with unknown capabilities operating within Imperial space. I would be obligated to eliminate you. It would be expensive, destructive, and probably futile. But I would try anyway. Because that's my duty. So my options are work for you or get orbital bombardment as a retirement gift. Essentially. Alucard laughed, genuine, delighted laughter that made even the stormtroopers shift uncomfortably. I love the honesty. No pretense of choice, no illusion of freedom. Just work for us or we'll try to kill you. Very refreshing. Fine. I accept your terms, Inquisitor. Point me at your monsters. Let me hunt the things that hunt humanity. Just promise me one thing. What? Don't bore me. If you're going to use me as a weapon, make sure the targets are worth my time. I didn't survive 5 centuries and travel across dimensions just to waste eternity on small-time cultists and minor heresies. Give me the big ones, the champions, the greater demons, the threats that make your cyclonic torpedoes look inadequate. Deal? Thelm considered this. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, the gesture formal, binding, witnessed by his entire retinue, and recorded by Witness 13. Deal. But understand this, vampire. The moment you become the monster you hunt, the moment corruption takes root, the moment you stop being useful and start being dangerous, I will end you. By faith, by fire, by whatever means necessary. The Emperor protects his servants and destroys his enemies. You are currently the former. Do not become the latter. Alucard took the offered hand, his grip firm, his smile never wavering. Understood. Though I should warn you, I've been the monster for 500 years. I just happen to point myself at other monsters. The day I actually become what I hunt will be the day you'll know, because reality itself will notice the difference. They shook, and the pact was sealed. The Thunderhawk continued its flight, leaving Spire Decadence burning behind it. Below, Arbite's forces were already moving in, beginning the systematic purge that would see 20,000 citizens executed before sunrise, most of them guilty only of living too close to corruption, of breathing air that had carried chaos taint, of the bad fortune to be present when the Inquisition decided thoroughness required genocide. Severina watched through her bound sight as psychic afterimages of those about to die flickered in her vision. "So many souls," she whispered. "The Emperor receives so many souls today. Does he weep for them? Does he rage at the necessity? Or has he seen so much death over 10 millennia that individual tragedy no longer registers?" "Does it matter?" Alucard asked, not unkindly. "Whether he weeps or doesn't, they still die. Whether it's necessary or isn't, you still do it. The universe doesn't care about your feelings, psychic. It just keeps grinding forward, and you either grind with it or get ground beneath it." "That's a bleak philosophy." "That's an honest philosophy," Alucard corrected. "But here's the thing. Just because the universe doesn't care doesn't mean you shouldn't. Feel bad about the 20,000 dying below. Rage at the necessity. Question whether the cure is worse than the disease. Then do your duty anyway, not because it's comfortable, but because someone has to make the hard calls. That's what separates soldiers from monsters. Soldiers feel the weight. Monsters just pull the trigger." Severina was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're very strange for a monster." "I prefer classically trained," Alucard said. "Now, if we're done with philosophical discussions, I believe someone mentioned quarters. I need to catalog my ammunition expenditure, assess my regeneration costs, and possibly sleep for the first time in decades. Turns out, fighting Chaos Champions is actually exhausting when you do it properly." "There are cells in the ship's brig," Kane offered. "Sanctified, warded against possession, monitored." "Perfect," Alucard interrupted. "As long as there's somewhere to sit that isn't actively trying to corrupt me, I'm satisfied. Lead the way, interrogator. I promise not to eat anyone on the way. Probably." As the retinue escorted him deeper into the ship, Thelm remained in the command throne, watching the burning spire recede in the distance. His hand moved to the inquisitorial rosette on his chest, fingers tracing the symbol that granted him authority and burden in equal measure. "Emperor, preserve us," he whispered, a prayer more reflexive than faithful. "I've just leashed a monster that insulted Slaanesh and survived. Either this is your divine will, or I've just committed the heresy that damns us all. I suppose we'll discover which soon enough." In the warp, impossibly distant yet pressed against reality like breath against glass, 4 Chaos Gods turned their attention away from Vespa 3. The game piece called Lysander had been removed. The disruptive element called Alucard had aligned itself with Imperial forces. Interesting. Khorne contemplated how to test this vampire's mettle in proper combat. Nurgle wondered whether corruption through decay might succeed where corruption through excess had failed. Tzeentch wove 17 new schemes around this unexpected variable. and Slaanesh, insulted and intrigued in equal measure, began planning revenge that would be exquisite in its cruelty and artistry. The game continued. The pieces moved. And Alucard, settling into a sanctified cell deep in the ship's brig, smiled into the darkness. "Finally," he whispered to nothing and everything. "Finally, a universe where I might actually find a worthy death, or eternal entertainment trying. Either option sounds perfect." Outside his cell, 2 stormtroopers stood guard, weapons ready, orders clear. Observe, report, execute if necessary. Inside the cell, Alucard closed his eyes and, for the first time in decades, allowed himself to rest. Tomorrow would bring new hunts, new monsters, new opportunities to test whether immortality was gift or curse. He could hardly wait. 3 weeks later, Alucard learned what it meant to be an inquisitorial asset in practice. The righteous persecution had become his temporary home, a floating cathedral of violence and paranoia that traversed the sector hunting heresy with methodical thoroughness. He'd been given quarters that were technically cells but functionally adequate, a reinforced chamber in the ship's lower decks, monitored by servo skulls, warded against demonic incursion, and sealed with locks blessed by a dozen different ecclesiarchy priests. He found it cozy. The crew gave him wide berth. Word had spread about what he was. Not human, not Xenos, not demon, but something that defied classification and had survived direct contact with Slaanesh. Rumors grew with each retelling. Some claimed he was a sanctioned weapon, created by the Emperor himself. Others whispered he was a contained chaos entity, leashed and aimed at greater threats. A few suggested he was something from before Old Night, a relic from humanity's golden age when science had played God and sometimes succeeded. All of them were wrong, but Alucard didn't bother correcting them. Mystery had tactical value. His first 2 assignments had been disappointingly straightforward. A Genestealer cult on an agri-world, eliminated in 4 hours once he'd located their hiding place beneath a reclamation facility. They'd been genuinely surprised when bullets proved more effective than their psychic conditioning and ambush tactics. The second had been a rogue psyker who'd been manifesting minor demons and terrorizing a hab block. That one had been over in minutes once Alucard demonstrated that his resistance to warp phenomena made him effectively immune to psychic assault. Both missions had earned Thelm's grudging approval and done nothing for Alucard's boredom. But the third assignment was different. "We've received distress signals from the system of Thraxia Secundus," Thelm announced during the mission briefing, his retinue assembled in the Strategium. The holo display showed a star system with 3 habitable worlds, currently flickering with warning sigils. Population, 800 million across the primary world and 2 mining colonies. 3 days ago, all communication ceased simultaneously. No ships have emerged from the system since. Our astropaths detect disturbances. Warp signatures that suggest large-scale demonic manifestation. Sounds like someone's having a party and forgot to send invitations, Alucard observed from his position at the back of the room. He'd learned to stay peripheral during briefings. Too close to the front and people became nervous. Too far and they forgot he was there and jumped when he spoke. "Initial reconnaissance suggests the entire primary world has been compromised," Kane continued, pulling up grainy pict captures from a servo skull probe that had survived long enough to transmit data before being destroyed. The images showed cities transformed, architecture warped into impossible geometries, streets running with what might have been water, or might have been something far less innocent. The manifestation appears to be Nurgle-aligned, signs of plague, mutation, and biomechanical corruption consistent with the Plague Father's influence. Severina shuddered, her chains rattling. "I can feel it even from here. The system screams with disease and entropy. Whatever happened, it wasn't gradual. This was a catastrophic warp breach, possibly triggered by cultist activity, but escalated far beyond normal incursion parameters." "Standard protocol would be exterminatus," Thelm said, his tone suggesting he'd already considered and rejected this option. Cyclonic torpedoes to crack the planet's crust, atmospheric incinerators to ensure total biomass destruction. The Imperium loses 800 million citizens, but chaos loses a foothold. But you're not doing that, Alucard said. Because if you were, you wouldn't be briefing me, which means there's something on that planet worth recovering. Or someone. Thelm's expression confirmed the assessment. The planet's governor, Lord Militant Crassus, was a former Astartes of the Death Guard before their corruption. He remained loyal during the heresy, one of the few. His knowledge of Nurgle's tactics, his understanding of the Plague Father's corruption, that information is invaluable. If there's any chance he survived, any possibility of extraction, we're obligated to attempt it. A Death Guard loyalist, Alucard said, his interest piqued. One of the uncorrupted ones. That is rare. But if Nurgle's forces have taken the planet, wouldn't he be target number one? The Plague Father must have a special hatred for those who rejected its gifts. Precisely why we need someone who can operate in a plague-saturated environment, Thelm said, turning to face Alucard directly. You've demonstrated immunity to Slaneshi corruption and resistance to warp phenomena. Nurgle's plagues are biological and demonic simultaneously. Can you survive them? Alucard considered. Disease, in the conventional sense, had no power over him. His undead physiology didn't support bacterial or viral infection in any meaningful way. But Nurgle's plagues were metaphysical as much as biological. Corruption that attacked the soul as readily as the flesh. Only one way to find out, he said with a grin. Though I should point out that if I can't survive them, you'll have wasted a perfectly good asset on a scouting mission. Seems tactically inefficient. The alternative is sending in Astartes, who are vulnerable to corruption despite their conditioning, Thelm said. Or Imperial Guard, who would die by the thousands. You're expendable in a way they're not. If you fall, we lose one variable asset. If they fall, we lose decades of training and faith-conditioned warriors. The mathematics favor your deployment. I love being expendable, Alucard said dryly. It's a nice change from being irreplaceable. Fine. I'll go to your plague world, locate your Death Guard loyalist, and extract him if he's still alive and uncorrupted. What's my insertion method? Drop pod? Teleportation? Do you just throw me out an airlock and hope I land somewhere useful? Thunderhawk insertion, minimum escort, Kane said. You'll have a two-man stormtrooper team for tactical support and Vox relay. Severina will remain aboard ship to monitor for signs of demonic presence. The Calexis assassin will deploy if you encounter greater demon manifestation. And if I become corrupted? Alucard asked, already knowing the answer. Orbital bombardment, Thelm said flatly. The moment Severina detects taint, the moment you deviate from mission parameters, the moment we lose Vox contact for longer than 30 minutes, we assume corruption and sterilize your location from orbit. Understood? Crystal clear. I have 30-minute leashes and permission to die horribly if Nurgle decides I look tasty. Excellent operational parameters. When do we deploy? 6 hours. That gives you time to prepare, review what intelligence we have on Nurgle tactics, and make peace with whatever gods you actually believe in. I don't believe in gods, Alucard said, standing. But I believe in interesting fights. And if Nurgle wants to test whether I'm corruptible through disease rather than excess, I'm happy to provide experimental data. See you in 6 hours, Inquisitor. Try not to blow me up before I've had a chance to actually accomplish something. He left the strategium, aware of the eyes tracking his departure, some fearful, some calculating, all uncertain whether he was savior or catastrophe waiting to happen. The armory was dimmed for ship's night cycle, lit only by emergency lumens and the soft glow of weapon maintenance stations. Alucard had requisitioned new ammunition, more blessed silver, more sanctified rounds, but also something new. Phosphex-tipped bullets, banned by the Imperium for general use, but still manufactured for inquisitorial deployment. The substance burned through anything organic and couldn't be extinguished by conventional means, perfect for fighting plague zombies and demonic manifestations. He was loading magazines with mechanical precision when Severina entered, her chains announcing her presence before her voice did. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Thelm acts like you're expendable, but you're not. You're unique, potentially invaluable. Throwing you into a Nurgle plague world is wasteful." "Wasteful would be sitting safely aboard ship while other people die doing what I'm better equipped to survive," Alucard said, not looking up from his work. "Besides, I'm curious. I've faced Slaaneish's temptations and Khorne's violence. I've tasted demon essence and survived direct divine attention. Nurgle is the third piece of the puzzle. The Plague Father, grandfather of entropy and despair. I want to see what it feels like when corruption comes wrapped in inevitability rather than pleasure or rage." "You're collecting experiences," Severina said, understanding dawning. "Testing yourself against each chaos god like they're challenges in some game only you're playing." "Something like that," Alucard admitted. "Where I come from, I fought vampires, Nazis, and the occasional Catholic strike team. It was entertaining but limited. Here I have gods to fight. Actual literal gods whose attention I can earn by being sufficiently annoying. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How few beings get the opportunity to genuinely antagonize divinity and survive long enough to try again? Most beings have the good sense not to want to antagonize divinity," Severina said. "The Chaos Gods aren't challenges to overcome. They're existential threats. Khorne has claimed trillions. Slaanesh devoured the Eldari gods and nearly destroyed their entire species. Nurgle's plagues have ended civilizations. And Tzeentch..." She shuddered. "Tzeentch operates on scales of manipulation that make mortal schemes look like children playing pretend. You're treating cosmic horror as entertainment." "That's because it is entertaining," Alucard said, finally looking up. "For the first time in decades, I'm genuinely uncertain about outcomes. I don't know if Nurgle's plagues can corrupt me. I don't know if greater demons are threats or appetizers. I don't know how far I can push before the universe pushes back hard enough to actually kill me. That uncertainty is valuable. It's what gives existence meaning when you've stopped being able to die easily." Severina was silent, processing this philosophy that treated damnation as curriculum. "You're insane. Functionally, genuinely insane. And the terrifying part is that your insanity is tactically effective enough that Thelm is willing to weaponize it." "Insanity is just pattern recognition that hasn't been validated yet," Alucard said with a smile. "Give it time. Either I'll prove that chaos can be resisted through sheer bloody-minded refusal to participate in their narratives, or I'll provide valuable data on what happens when an undead predator tries to eat gods. Win-win for the scientific method." "That's not how the scientific method works." "It is when you're the experiment," Alucard interrupted. He holstered the freshly loaded magazines and stood, adjusting his coat. The garment had been repaired by the ship's servitors, though they'd done strange things to it. Incorporated blessed threads, woven prayers into the lining, added purity seals to the collar. It was simultaneously more and less functional than before. "Tell me something, Psyker," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "When you look at me with your warp sight, what do you actually see? Not what I am or what I do, but what I look like, in that space between material and immaterial." Severina hesitated, then slowly unwound one of the chains covering her eyes. The exposed eye glowed with pale light, warp energy channeled through augmented biology, giving her sight beyond sight. She looked at Alucard, and her breath caught. "You're hollow," she whispered. "No, not hollow. You're a void that's been filled with other voids. 3 million souls, you said. I can see them now. They're pressed against the inside of your existence like prisoners against cell walls. Some are screaming, some are sleeping. Some have been there so long they've forgotten they were ever separate. And at the center, where you should be... She stopped, chains rattling with agitation. There's nothing. Just appetite. Just the endless hunger to continue. You're not a being with desires. Your desire given form and consciousness. A walking hunger that learned to think. Poetic, Alucard said. Also probably accurate. I stopped being Vlad Dracula about 4 centuries ago. The person I was died multiple times over. What I am now is what survived. The parts that refused to stop. The hunger that wouldn't quit. The will to persist regardless of cost. Everything else got burned away through centuries of violence and undeath. And you're comfortable with that? Severina asked. Being hollow? Being nothing but appetite and will? Comfort is irrelevant, Alucard said. I am what I am. The question isn't whether I like it, but whether I can use it. And as it turns out, being an immortal predator with no higher purpose than find worthy opponents is surprisingly useful in a universe made of horror. The Imperium needs soldiers who can fight without breaking. I don't break because there's nothing left to break, just the core drive to hunt, kill, and move on to the next target. He walked toward the armory exit, then paused at the threshold. Thanks for the honesty, Psychic. Most people see the monster and stop looking. You looked deeper and saw the void underneath. I appreciate that. It's rare to find people who can handle uncomfortable truths. Wait, Severina called after him. One more thing. When I looked at you, at the void where you should be, I saw something else. Something watching from deeper in. Like there's something even further down than the hunger and the will. Something old. Something that terrifies me more than anything I've ever seen in the warp. Oh? Alucard's smile was back, but it carried a different edge now. And what do you think that is? I don't know, Severina admitted. But whatever it is, it's been sleeping for a very long time. And I hope, it never wakes up. Because if it does, if that thing at your core ever becomes active, I don't think chaos itself could contain it. Interesting, Alucard said thoughtfully. I'll try not to wake it then. Wouldn't want to disappoint by becoming even more dangerous than I already am. See you after Thraxia, Psychic. Assuming Nurgle doesn't turn me into fertilizer. He left, and Severina stood alone in the dimmed armory, her chains slowly wrapping back around her eyes, cutting off the warp sight that had shown her something she desperately wished she could unsee. Far below, in the ship's brig where Alucard's cell was located, one of the guard stormtroopers turned to his partner. You ever wonder what we're actually guarding? He asked quietly. Orders say, inquisitorial asset, the partner replied. That's all we need to know. But what is he? Not human, not Xenos. The rumors say he fought a Slaneshi champion and won, that he can eat demons, that he's unkillable. Rumors also said the Emperor would return before the millennium, the first stormtrooper said. Doesn't make them true. We guard what the Inquisitor tells us to guard. We follow orders. We don't ask questions that get people executed for knowing too much. Understood? Understood. They returned to silence, watching a cell that contained something that shouldn't exist, following orders they didn't fully comprehend, serving an Imperium that required faith precisely because understanding was impossible. And deep in the warp, Nurgle stirred, its attention drawn to Thraxia Secundus, where one of its grandest plagues was transforming a world into a garden of beautiful decay. Something was coming. Something that didn't fear disease, that couldn't be corrupted through despair, that treated existential horror as entertainment. The Plague Father began preparing a special welcome. After all, even entropy needed new material to work with, and this vampire promised to be fascinating. Thraxia Secundus looked beautiful from orbit, in the way that gangrene can look beautiful if you appreciate the artistry of decay. The planet's surface had transformed over 3 days from standard Imperial gray into something that resembled a diseased organ more than a world. Continents were mottled green and brown, covered in what orbital augurs identified as biomass growths expanding at exponential rates. The oceans had turned a sickly yellow-green, their surfaces churning with what might have been algae blooms or might have been something far worse. And across the Terminator line, visible even from high orbit, massive structures had erupted, towers of bone and rust, cathedrals built from compressed corpses, monuments to entropy that reached into the upper atmosphere. "Lovely vacation spot," Alucard observed, watching through the Thunderhawk's viewport as they descended through the diseased atmosphere. "Really captures that everything is dying and we're celebrating it aesthetic. Nurgle has commitment to theme, I'll give it that." The pilot, a veteran with 3 decades of experience flying through war zones, kept his eyes locked on his instruments. "Atmospheric composition is toxic. 93 different contaminants detected, 14 of which are actively hostile to life. Recommend sealed environment suits for all personnel." "Noted," said Sergeant Tyven, one of the 2 stormtroopers assigned to Alucard's escort. He and his partner, Corporal Maris, wore fully sealed carapace armor with integrated rebreathers. They'd been selected specifically for this mission, veterans of Plague World deployments, vaccinated against every known pathogen, and blessed with enough anti-demon wards to make Severina uncomfortable. "Asset, confirm you don't require environmental protection?" "The name is Alucard," the vampire said, not for the first time. "And no, I don't breathe in any conventional sense. Poison gas is just scenery to me, though I appreciate the concern." The Thunderhawk shuddered as something struck the fuselage. Not anti-aircraft fire, but a flock of creatures that had once been birds but were now flying pustules, their bodies swollen with disease, their beaks dripping plague. They splattered against the armored hull, their acidic fluids hissing but failing to penetrate blessed ceramite. "Welcome to Thraxia," Tyven muttered. "Where even the wildlife wants you dead." They'd chosen a landing zone on the outskirts of Capital Hive Primus, the seat of planetary government and Lord Militant Crassus's last known location. Intelligence suggested the Hive had been fortified, that loyalist forces had made their stand there when the plague manifestation began. Whether anyone still survived was speculation. The Thunderhawk's auspex showed movement throughout the Hive, thousands of signatures, maybe tens of thousands, concentrated in the lower levels and spreading outward. But the signatures were wrong. Movement patterns too erratic for organized defense, too coordinated for mindless wandering. Something intelligent was directing the infected. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot announced. "Asset, you're first out." "We maintain aerial overwatch and extraction readiness. Your Vox signal drops for more than 30 minutes. We assume compromise and report to Inquisitor Thelm." "Understood?" "Perfectly," Alucard said, standing and moving toward the assault ramp. "Try not to leave without me. I'd hate to have to walk back to orbit." The Thunderhawk touched down on a landing platform that had once been pristine Imperial architecture, but was now covered in something that looked like diseased coral, brittle, reaching structures that crumbled at the lightest touch while releasing clouds of spores. The assault ramp deployed, and Alucard descended into hell. The smell hit first. Not the clean, sterile smell of death, but something richer, more complex. Rot mixed with sweetness, decay dancing with strange floral notes. The scent of things that had died weeks ago but refused to stop moving. It was the smell of Nurgle's gifts, corruption that promised rest, peace, and an end to struggle through the embrace of entropy. Alucard inhaled deeply and smiled. "Nostalgic. Reminds me of plague pits during the Middle Ages. Humanity hasn't changed much, just gotten better at industrializing their dying." Tyven and Maris descended behind him, weapons raised, moving with tactical precision through an environment that wanted them dead. Every surface was potentially infectious. Every shadow could hide plague zombies. Every breath through their rebreathers was one step closer to filter failure and horrible death. "Auspex shows movement 300 meters northeast," Maris reported, his voice modulated through his helmet's vox. "Large concentration. Could be survivors, could be infected. Recommend cautious approach." "Recommendation noted," Alucard said, already walking in that direction with complete disregard for tactical caution. "But if they're survivors, speed matters more than stealth. If they're infected, well, that's what I'm here for." The architecture of Capital Hive Primus had been transformed. Gothic spires and buttresses were now covered in fungal growths that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Streets that had carried millions of workers were clogged with biomass, tentacles of plant matter or flesh matter or something between, creating an organic network that connected every building, every structure, turning the entire hive into a single diseased organism. They found the first bodies after 50 meters, or what had been bodies. The plague dead of Nurgle didn't always stay dead. Sometimes they just transitioned into different states of existence. These had been hive workers, their bodies swollen with infection, skin turned green and mottled, organs visible through translucent flesh. But they were moving, shambling with mechanical purpose, carrying construction materials and building supplies toward some unknown destination. Plague zombies, poxwalkers, in Nurglite terminology. The infected who had embraced the grandfather's gifts and now served as mindless labor in his gardens of decay. 13 contacts, Tyven said, his hellgun tracking targets. "Rules of engagement?" "Non-hostile until proven otherwise," Alucard said, observing the zombies' behavior. "They're not attacking. They're building." "Curious." He approached one of the poxwalkers, a man who had been perhaps 40 years old, probably a manufactorum worker based on the remnants of his uniform. The zombie's eyes were clouded white, cataracts or some form of fungal growth, but they tracked Alucard's approach with disturbing awareness. "Hello," Alucard said conversationally. "I'm looking for Lord Militant Crassus. Former Death Guard, very tall, probably still has some ceramite plating even after rejecting the Plague Father's gifts. Have you seen him?" The poxwalker's mouth opened, jaw dislocating impossibly wide, and released a sound that was part moan, part harmonics, part language that human ears weren't designed to parse. But Alucard's senses, honed beyond human limitation, caught the underlying message. The grandfather sees. The grandfather knows. The grandfather welcomes all who despair. "That's a no, then," Alucard said. He drew the casul and shot the poxwalker through the head. The blessed round detonated the skull into fragments, and the body collapsed, finally allowed to be truly dead. The other 12 poxwalkers stopped their construction work and turned as one, their clouded eyes fixing on Alucard with new purpose. "Contact!" Maris shouted, opening fire with his hellgun. The hotshot lass rounds punched through diseased flesh with thermal precision, dropping 3 zombies in quick succession. Tyven joined the barrage, his shots coordinated with his partner through decades of battlefield experience. Alucard holstered the castle and drew the jackal. 12 left. Let's make this educational. Sergeant, take the ones on the left. Corporal, right flank. I'll handle the center. Last one standing buys drinks." "We don't drink with assets," Tyven said, but he was already repositioning, using the fungal growths as cover. The poxwalkers attacked with shambling speed, their diseased bodies driven by something beyond normal biology. They wielded improvised weapons, rusted rebar, corroded pipes, tools that had been part of hive infrastructure before Nurgle's corruption turned them into instruments of infection. Alucard met them head-on. The jackal roared, each shot placed with surgical precision. Not headshots. Those were too easy. He targeted joints, structural points, testing how much damage the plague-animated corpses could absorb before failing. The first took 3 rounds before collapsing. The second required 5. The third continued functioning even after Alucard blew both kneecaps out. crawling forward with single-minded determination until Tyvan's Hellgun finally ended its existence. "They're remarkably persistent," Alucard observed, reloading. "The infection doesn't just animate, it optimizes. Each one is slightly more efficient than the last, learning from failures, adapting to attacks. Nurgle's corruption isn't mindless. It's incremental evolution through decay." "Save the analysis for the report," Tyvan said tersely. "We've got more incoming." The firefight had attracted attention. From the hive's depths, more poxwalkers emerged, dozens of them, then hundreds, shambling from side streets and building entrances, drawn by violence or commanded by some unseen intelligence. They filled the street like a tide of diseased flesh, advancing with inevitable momentum. "Time to leave," Maris said, already backing toward their entry point. "We're outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and—" An explosion tore through the zombie horde, scattering bodies like plague-filled confetti. Then another, and another. Someone was providing covering fire from an elevated position. "Move, you idiots!" a voice bellowed across Vox channels, heavily distorted but unmistakably authoritative. "Fall back to the Administratum Spire! We'll provide suppression!" Alucard looked up and saw him. A figure in power armor, standing on a rooftop 3 stories up, wielding a bolter that spat explosive death into the zombie horde. The armor was ceramite, Astartes grade, but it had been modified, stripped of chaos iconography and repainted in dull imperial gray. Purity seals covered every surface, layered so thick they resembled armor themselves. And the warrior's movements carried the brutal efficiency of someone who had fought for centuries. Lord Militant Crassus, the Death Guard loyalist, still alive, still uncorrupted. "You heard the man," Alucard said to Tyvan and Maris. "Fall back. I'll hold the line." "You'll what?" Tyvan started. Alucard moved. He didn't retreat. He advanced into the zombie horde, both pistols blazing, each shot a thunderclap that dropped diseased bodies. But the numbers were impossible. For every poxwalker that fell, 3 more took its place. They grabbed at him, their touch spreading plague corruption, their fingers leaving trails of disease wherever they contacted flesh. Alucard's body began to rot. Not dying, his regeneration fought the infection with desperate ferocity, burning through absorbed souls at catastrophic rates. Where plague touched, flesh decayed. Where regeneration activated, flesh renewed. The 2 forces fought for dominance across his body, creating a horrific spectacle of tissue dying and reviving in rapid cycles. "Emperor's blood," Maris whispered, watching through his helmet's magnification. "He's fighting Nurgle's plague through pure regeneration. That shouldn't be possible." "Move!" Crassus's voice commanded again, and more bolter fire tore through the horde. Other weapons joined in, laser guns, stubbers, even flamers that bathed the streets in cleansing fire. There were survivors, Alucard realized. An organized resistance, holding out in the Administratum Spire, maintaining imperial order even as their world drowned in disease. He fought his way back to Tyvan and Maris, his body a patchwork of decay and renewal, his coat shredded, his weapons empty. The 3 of them ran, pursued by hundreds of poxwalkers, covered by bolter fire from above. They reached the Administratum Spire's entrance, a fortified gate reinforced with scavenged metal and blessed with every prayer the survivors could remember. It opened just enough to admit them, then slammed shut with pneumatic force that crushed several zombies who'd gotten too close. Inside, Alucard collapsed. Not from weakness, from exhaustion. The plague had hurt, had genuinely challenged his regeneration in ways nothing since arriving in this universe had managed. Nurgle's gifts weren't just biological corruption. They were metaphysical assault, attacking the concept of life itself, trying to convince his body that decay was natural, inevitable, even desirable. He'd burned through 50,000 souls fighting it off. 50,000 lives consumed in 30 seconds of exposure to Grandfather Nurgle's love. "Emperor, preserve us," a voice said. A woman wearing the tattered remains of an Arbeit's uniform approached cautiously. "What is that thing?" "It's covered in Nurgle's rot, but it's still moving, still fighting." "That thing," Crassus's voice came from above, the warrior descending stairs with heavy footfalls, "is either our salvation or our damnation. Time will tell which." He stopped before Alucard, his helmet's optics glowing red in the dim light. "I am Lord Militant Crassus, former apothecary of the 14 Legion before their betrayal. And you are the strangest thing I've seen in 3 centuries of service. So tell me, plague-resistant anomaly, are you here to save us, kill us, or something more complicated?" Alucard looked up at the Astartes, his body still regenerating, his eyes gleaming with exhausted amusement. "All 3, he said. "But let's start with saving you, see how that goes, and improvise the rest. I'm Alucard. Inquisitor Thelm sent me to extract you. We should probably discuss the tactical situation, your survival strategy, and whether that plague I just absorbed is going to have interesting side effects. But first," he managed a tired smile, "do you have anywhere I can sit that isn't actively trying to infect me? I'm having a day." Crassus stared at him for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the Death Guard loyalist laughed, a sound like grinding metal, but genuine nonetheless. "I've been holding this spire for 3 days against a demonic plague incursion with 200 survivors and dwindling ammunition. An immortal vampire who can absorb Nurgle's rot without dying is the least strange thing that's happened this week. Come. We'll debrief, plan extraction, and figure out what happens when the grandfather of plagues realizes something is eating his children." He extended a ceramite gauntleted hand. Alucard took it and stood, still regenerating, still fighting off lingering corruption, but functional. "This," he said, "is going to be interesting." The Administratum Spire's command center had been converted into a wartime bunker, functioning on emergency power, its windows sealed with scavenged metal plating, every entrance barricaded and blessed with whatever holy symbols the survivors could improvise. 217 souls remained alive within its walls, and every one of them looked at Alucard with expressions ranging from terror to desperate hope. Lord Militant Crassus removed his helmet, revealing features that carried 3 centuries of hard living. His face was scarred, one eye replaced with a bionic optic that glowed faintly red, his skin the pale gray that came from decades in power armor with minimal UV exposure. But what struck Alucard most was the awareness in his remaining organic eye, the sharp intelligence of someone who had seen the absolute worst humanity and chaos could offer and remained functionally sane. "Sit," Crassus commanded, gesturing to a reinforced chair that groaned under Alucard's weight as his body continued its struggle between decay and regeneration. "Medici, approach but don't touch. I want analysis of whatever infection he's fighting." A woman in tattered medical robes stepped forward cautiously, her augmetic scanner whirring as it swept across Alucard's still regenerating flesh. Her eyes widened as data streamed across her display. "Lord Militant, this is... I don't even know where to begin. His cellular structure is fighting Nurgle's rot in real time. Every infected cell is being replaced faster than the plague can spread, but it's costing him. I'm detecting massive energy expenditure as if his body is burning through some internal reserve at catastrophic rates." "Souls," Alucard said, his voice strained but functional. "I burn souls for regeneration. Absorbed lives serving as fuel. The plague is expensive. Each second of exposure cost me approximately 800 lives. At current infection levels, I'll be clean in about 6 minutes, having consumed roughly 55,000 souls total." The Medici's scanner clattered to the floor. 55,000. That's heresy. That's demonic. That's survival mechanics from a different universe, Alucard interrupted. And unless you want Nurgle's rot to finish what it started, I suggest you let me finish regenerating before we get into theological debates about whether my existence offends your god." Crassus raised a hand for silence. "He's inquisitorial. That means Thelm vetted him, which means he's either sanctioned or the Inquisitor has committed a heresy that will see him executed. Either way, not our problem right now." He turned to Alucard. "You said Thelm sent you for extraction. That implies he has orbital assets. Can you contact him?" "Sergeant Tyven has Vox Relay," Alucard said, gesturing to where the stormtrooper was setting up communications equipment in the corner. "Though I should warn you, Thelm's extraction protocol includes blow everything up if it looks corrupted. You've got 200 survivors in a plague-saturated hive. His default response might be orbital bombardment first. Ask questions never." "Then we convince him we're worth saving," Crassus said flatly. "I have intelligence on Nurgle's manifestation. How it began, what triggered it, and more importantly, who's directing it. That information is worth more than 200 lives to the Inquisition." "Who is directing it?" Alucard asked, his regeneration finally stabilizing, the last traces of plague rot burning away under his supernatural immune response. "Because that welcome committee outside wasn't random. Those poxwalkers were organized, purposeful. Someone intelligent is commanding them." Crassus pulled up a holo display showing the hive's schematic. Red markers indicated plague concentrations, blue showed their current position, and at the hive's deepest level, a single gold marker pulsed with ominous certainty. "Typhus," Crassus said, his voice carrying the weight of old hatred. "Herald of Nurgle, first captain of the Death Guard, the one who betrayed our legion to the Plague Father during the heresy." He paused, his organic eye fixed on Alucard. "My former commander, the one who offered me ascension and eternal life through Nurgle's gifts. I refused. He's hated me for 3 centuries because of that refusal." "Dramatic," Alucard observed. "So this entire planetary corruption is what, personal? He tracked you down just to finish an argument from 300 years ago?" "Typhus doesn't do anything that's just personal," Crassus said. "He's here because Thraxia Secundus had strategic value. Shipyards, manufactorums, a population that could be converted into plague bearers. But finding me here, that's a bonus he couldn't resist. He's been besieging this spire specifically, bypassing other targets because he wants me to choose, to finally accept that my resistance was futile, to embrace Nurgle's gifts willingly rather than be consumed by them." "And you've been telling him no for 3 days straight," Alucard said with approval. "I respect the commitment to spite. How long can you hold?" "Ammunition runs out in 6 hours. Food for another day, maybe 2 with strict rationing. Water purification systems are failing. Nurgle's corruption is seeping through the recyclers. We can last 72 hours maximum before we're forced to either surrender or die fighting." "Then we don't wait 72 hours, Alucard said, standing fully restored, his coat reforming from shadows to replace the shredded original. "We go on the offensive. You have intelligence Thelm needs. I have instructions to extract you. And conveniently, there's a Herald of Nurgle sitting in your basement practically begging to be shot. I see a convergence of objectives." "You want to fight Typhus," Crassus said slowly. "The Herald of Nurgle. A demon prince in all but official title. A being who has commanded plague fleets for 3 centuries and personally corrupted 7 worlds. You want to fight him." "I want to see if I can eat him," Alucard corrected. "I've absorbed a bloodletter and survived Slaaneish's direct attention. Nurgle's the 3rd piece of my Chaos God collection. Plus, if Typhus is here personally, that means he's invested. Which means killing him, or at least grievously inconveniencing him, will hurt Nurgle in ways conventional warfare can't achieve." The command center had gone silent. 200 survivors stared at the vampire who had just proposed assaulting a Herald of Nurgle as if it were a mild inconvenience rather than certain death. Crassus studied Alucard with that sharp, calculating intelligence. You're either the Emperor's greatest gift or the Warp's cruelest joke. Possibly both. He turned to his second-in-command, a woman wearing the remnants of PDF officer uniform. Captain Vrel, prepare the survivors for evacuation. All non-combatants to the upper levels, ready for immediate extraction once the Inquisition confirms landing coordinates. Lord Militant, you can't be seriously considering— I am, Crassus interrupted. Because he's right. We can hold and die slowly, or we can strike while we still have strength. And if there's even a chance this vampire can hurt Typhus the way he claims, I want to be there to see it. I've waited 3 centuries for a chance at revenge. I'm not missing this opportunity. He turned back to Alucard. You'll need a guide who knows the hive's layout and Typhus's likely position. You'll need someone who understands Death Guard tactics and can predict his strategy. You'll need backup that won't immediately die from plague exposure. You're volunteering, Alucard said. I'm insisting, Crassus corrected. This is my world, my responsibility, my former brother who betrayed everything we stood for. You get your target, I get closure, and the Imperium gets intelligence on Nurgle's current operations. Everyone wins except Typhus. And the 200 civilians? We'll evacuate the moment Thelm confirms extraction capability, Crassus said. Captain Vrel is perfectly capable of coordinating that without me. My place is in the depths, ensuring the Plague Father's herald gets a reception he won't forget. Across the command center, Tyvan finished establishing Vox contact. My Lord Inquisitor, I have Sergeant Tyvan reporting. Asset is recovered and functional. We've made contact with Lord Militant Crassus and confirmed 217 survivors requiring extraction, requesting. Thelm's voice cut through, cold and precise. Status of plague corruption? Are the survivors clean? Negative, my lord. Estimated 78% show signs of early-stage infection. Nothing advanced. But contamination is present. Silence on the Vox. Then, recommendation is standard purge protocol. Survivors are acceptable losses if corruption risk is present. Recommendation rejected, Crassus said, stepping forward to address the Vox directly. This is Lord Militant Crassus, formerly of the Huaptine Legion, currently commanding Imperial forces on Thraxia Secundus. I have intelligence on Herald Typhus, his current capabilities, his strategic objectives, and Nurgle's planned expansion in this sector. That intelligence is worth more than 200 potentially infected civilians. Authorize extraction or explain to your superiors why you wasted an opportunity to gather actionable intelligence on a herald of chaos. Another pause. Alucard could almost hear Thelm calculating, running threat assessments, weighing pragmatism against doctrine. Intelligence first, Thelm finally said. Survive the next 6 hours and prove your people are clean enough to extract. Then we discuss terms. And Alucard— Still here, Alucard said cheerfully. Your mission parameters have changed. If Typhus is present, he's a primary target. Eliminate or drive him off. Do not attempt to absorb him unless you're certain you can survive the attempt. Herald-level entities carry corruption that makes lesser demons look clean by comparison. Understood. I'll be careful. Or reckless. Probably reckless. Emperor preserve us, Thelm muttered, and severed the connection. Crassus turned to his assembled survivors. You heard the Inquisitor. 6 hours to prove we're worth saving. Which means we have 6 hours to ensure Typhus is too busy dying to notice you evacuating. Combat personnel, arm up. We're going demon hunting. 23 survivors stepped forward. The ones with military training, the ones who'd kept the spire defended for 3 days, the ones who looked at the prospect of fighting a herald of Nurgle and saw duty rather than suicide. That's not enough, Captain Vrel said. 23 soldiers and 1 Astartes against a herald and his plague host? That's not tactics. That's martyrdom. Then we'll be glorious martyrs, Crassus said. Or we'll be the unit that killed Typhus and lived to tell the tale. Either way, history remembers us. Asset Alucard. Are you ready? Alucard checked his weapons. The castle and jackal were loaded with the phosphex-tipped rounds he'd prepared, ammunition designed to burn through anything organic and keep burning. Against Nurgle's plague zombies, against corrupted flesh that refused to die properly, they would be devastatingly effective. Born ready, he said, or in my case, died ready and kept going anyway. Lead on, Lord Militant. Let's go introduce your former commander to the concept of permanent death, or at least very long-term inconvenience. Crassus donned his helmet, the ceramite sealing with pneumatic hisses. The deepest levels are completely corrupted. Reality is thin there. Nurgle's presence makes the warp bleed through. You'll see things, hear things. The plague will try to convince you that resistance is futile, that decay is natural, that embracing entropy is the only logical choice. I've heard similar speeches, Alucard said. They get less convincing with repetition. Shall we? They descended into the hive's depths, Crassus in the lead with his bolter, Alucard behind him with pistols drawn, Tyvan and Maris providing rear security, and 23 survivors following with whatever weapons they'd managed to keep functional through 3 days of siege. The architecture changed as they went deeper. The upper levels had been merely corrupted, infected with plague growth but still recognizably imperial. The middle levels were transformed. Organic structures replacing ferrocrete, walls that breathed, floors that pulsed with diseased heartbeats. The deepest levels were something else entirely. They had become Nurgle's garden. Trees grew from corpses, their branches heavy with fruit that screamed when touched. Rivers of bile and pus flowed through channels that had been streets, carrying bloated bodies that somehow still lived, still suffered, still served the grandfather's endless cycle. The air was thick enough to chew, heavy with spores and disease, and the psychic weight of despair made manifest. And in the center of it all, in what had once been the hive's geothermal processing center, something vast waited. Typhus, herald of Nurgle, sat on a throne made from the bodies of those he'd corrupted. His armor was Terminator pattern, ancient and terrible, covered in rust and plague marks and symbols that hurt to see. His scythe, the Man Reaper, rested against one shoulder, its blade gleaming with toxins that could kill space marines with a scratch. He looked up as they entered, and his eyes, visible through his helmet's optics, showed recognition and terrible joy. Crassus! Typhus's voice was wrought, given sound, each word dripping with disease. My brother, you've brought friends. How considerate. And what a strange friend you've chosen. Those eyes fixed on Alucard. A vampire. An undead thing that dares walk in Grandfather Nurgle's garden. How delicious. The Plague Father will enjoy claiming you, almost as much as I'll enjoy watching my brother finally accept inevitability. Hello, Alucard said pleasantly, both pistols aimed at the herald's head. I'm here to ruin your day and possibly eat your soul. Please don't take it personally, it's just business. Typhus laughed, a sound like plague bells ringing across a dying world. Oh, this will be magnificent. The throne room, if such a term could be applied to a space that violated every principle of sacred architecture, erupted into violence before anyone could draw breath. Typhus moved first, despite the massive Terminator armor that should have made him ponderous. The Herald of Nurgle crossed 15 meters in 2 seconds, his scythe sweeping in an arc that would have bisected everyone in its path. Crassus met the strike with his own power sword, the blessed blade screaming as it contacted the Man Reaper's corrupted edge. The impact sent shockwaves through the chamber. Crassus, even in his ceramite power armor, was driven back 3 meters, his boots carving furrows in the diseased floor. Typhus's strength was transhuman multiplied by demonic enhancement, a herald of chaos operating at the peak of his terrible power. Still fighting. Little brother, Typhus's voice carried genuine affection beneath the rot. Still pretending your resistance means something? 3 centuries, Crassus. 3 centuries of watching your brothers ascend while you clung to a corpse's failed dream. When will you learn that the Emperor abandoned us? That Grandfather Nurgle offers the only truth, entropy, decay, and the peace of acceptance? The Emperor never abandoned us, Crassus snarled, pressing forward with his blade. You abandoned him. You chose corruption over duty, and I've spent 3 centuries proving that loyalty means something even when it costs everything. While the 2 former brothers clashed, Alucard moved. The Phosphex rounds from the Casul traced burning lines through the air, each shot aimed not at Typhus directly, but at the plague zombies that were emerging from alcoves throughout the chamber. Poxwalkers by the dozens, then hundreds, shambling toward the survivors with mindless purpose. The Phosphex worked as advertised. Where normal bullets might wound or kill, these rounds unmade. The chemical fire spread through diseased flesh like wildfire through dry wood, consuming everything organic it touched and refusing to be extinguished. Zombies collapsed into pyres, their plague-infected bodies serving as fuel for their own cremation. "Sergeant, establish firing line," Tyvan commanded, already positioning himself behind a corroded support pillar. "Concentrated fire, overlapping fields. Don't let them flank!" The 23 survivors formed a defensive perimeter with practiced efficiency. These were veterans of 3 days holding impossible positions. Their laser guns and stubbers might not have the stopping power of Astartes weaponry, but disciplined volleys could still drop poxwalkers through sheer volume of fire. Maris threw a frag grenade into a cluster of zombies, the explosions scattering body parts that continued trying to crawl forward even after being reduced to component pieces. "They don't stop! Even destroyed, they keep—" A tentacle erupted from the diseased floor, wrapping around Maris's leg with crushing force. The corporal screamed as plague corruption burned through his armor's seals, toxic fluids eating through ceramite and flesh simultaneously. Alucard was there in an instant, the jackal roaring as explosive rounds severed the tentacle at its base. He grabbed Maris and threw him back toward the defensive line, not gently but effectively, then turned his attention to the floor itself. The entire chamber was alive. What they'd taken for solid ground was actually a thin membrane over something vast and terrible. Through translucent sections, Alucard could see it, a demon of Nurgle, one of the great unclean ones, too large to manifest fully in real space but present enough to influence the battle. Its tentacles were probing from below, seeking victims, trying to drag them down into its embrace. "Crassus!" Alucard shouted. "The floor is a demon! We're fighting on its skin!" The Lord Militant heard, understood, and adjusted his tactics instantly. He broke from his duel with Typhus, rolling away from a scythe strike that would have opened him from shoulder to hip, and fired his bolter point-blank into the floor. The mass-reactive rounds penetrated the membrane and detonated inside the demon's body. The creature's scream shook the entire chamber, not sound but psychic agony that made every human present clutch their heads in pain. The floor convulsed, tentacles thrashing wildly, trying to buck them off like a diseased horse throwing its riders. "Magnificent!" Typhus roared, his voice layered with harmonics that carried Nurgle's approval. "You bring war to my garden! You hurt the grandfather's blessed children! This is why I always loved you, Crassus. You refuse to accept inevitability. You fight even when fighting is meaningless." He raised the Man-Reaper high, and the air grew thick with manifesting power, disease made tangible, plague given form, clouds of toxic vapor that condensed from nothing and rolled toward the defensive line like malevolent fog. "Gas masks won't save you," Typhus called out. "These are Nurgle's choicest gifts, contagions that kill through armor, through sealed suits, through faith itself. Grandfather's love reaches everywhere, touches everyone, claims all who breathe." The plague cloud hit the survivors, and 3 of them collapsed immediately, their armor seals irrelevant against corruption that operated on metaphysical principles. Their bodies began to rot from the inside out, flesh liquefying, organs failing. But they didn't die. They transformed, their agonized screams turning to wet gurgles as Nurgle's gifts remade them into plague-bearers. "Fall back," Tyvan commanded, already dragging wounded comrades toward the chamber's entrance. "We can't hold against Herald-level manifestation. Asset we need." Alucard walked into the plague cloud. The toxic mist enveloped him, searing his flesh, rotting his organs, attacking him at every biological level simultaneously. His regeneration screamed, burning through souls at catastrophic rates. 5,000 gone in the first second, 10,000 in the second, 20,000 by the time he reached the cloud's epicenter where Typhus stood wreathed in his grandfather's love. "Fascinating," Alucard said, his voice distorted by the fact that his lungs were currently dissolving and reforming in rapid cycles. "This is worse than the street-level exposure. More concentrated, more personal. I can feel Nurgle's attention directly now. It's trying to convince my body that decay is natural, that resistance is suffering, that I should just let go and embrace entropy." He raised both pistols, his hands barely functional, fingers rotting off and regenerating fast enough to maintain grip. "Tell Grandfather Nurgle I said, not interested." The Kasol and Jackal fired simultaneously, blessed Phosphex rounds at point-blank range aimed at Typhus's head. The Herald moved with impossible speed, his scythe intercepting both rounds mid-flight. The Phosphex detonated against the Man-Reaper's blade, chemical fire spreading across corrupted metal, and for a moment, just a moment, Typhus's concentration broke. The plague cloud dissipated. Crassus seized the opportunity. His bolter fired a 3-round burst at Typhus's exposed back, the weak points in Terminator armor that even the best smiths couldn't completely reinforce. 2 rounds deflected off Ceramite. The third found a gap between plates and detonated inside. Typhus staggered. Not hurt, not genuinely wounded, but surprised. The Herald of Nurgle hadn't expected coordinated assault from opponents who should have been drowning in despair by now. "You dare," Typhus said, his voice carrying genuine affront beneath the rot. "You dare strike me? I who have claimed worlds in the Grandfather's name? I who personally corrupted 7,000 souls on Istvan III? You think your blessed bullets and desperate faith can harm one who has transcended mortality?" "I think," Alucard said, his body finally stabilizing as the ambient plague concentration dropped, "that you're monologuing when you should be fighting. Big mistake. Villains who explain their philosophy always lose." He holstered his pistols and moved, crossing the distance to Typhus faster than transhuman reflexes could track. His hands, now clawed, his vampiric nature asserting itself through the regeneration damage, grabbed the Herald's helmet and pulled. Ceramite screamed, seals popped, and Typhus's helmet came away, revealing the face beneath. It was beautiful, in the way that gangrene can be beautiful if you appreciate the artistry of decay. Typhus's features had been perfectly preserved by Nurgle's gifts. He looked almost human, almost alive, except for the eyes that held nothing but plague, and the smile that showed teeth filed to points and gums that wept blood. "Hello," Alucard said, staring into those eyes from centimeters away. "Let's see if heralds taste better than regular daemons." He bit. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. He physically bit into Typhus's exposed throat and drank. The herald's blood was corruption made liquid, plague, disease, entropy, and despair concentrated into fluid form. It burned going down, seared Alucard's throat, tried to unmake him from the inside out. His body rejected it, then absorbed it, then rejected it again in a cycle that cost him 100,000 souls in 3 seconds. But he kept drinking. Because beneath the corruption, beneath the demonic taint, there was something else. There was essence. There was Typhus's accumulated power, his centuries of service to Nurgle, his herald status granted through millennia of faithful corruption. and Alucard was taking it, consuming it, stealing the very thing that made Typhus more than a mortal chaos marine. Typhus screamed, not in pain, but in outrage. "What are you doing? You shouldn't be able to—" Crassus didn't waste the opening. His power sword plunged into the gap where Typhus's helmet had been, piercing through corrupted flesh, seeking the spine, the nervous system, anything vital enough to matter. The blade struck something that screamed in languages mortal throats couldn't speak. Typhus exploded backward, throwing both Alucard and Crassus away with demonic strength. The herald stood, his throat already regenerating, his armor sealing. But something had changed. His movements were slower. His presence was diminished. A fraction of his power was simply gone, consumed by something that shouldn't have been able to consume chaos. "Grandfather!" Typhus bellowed, his voice carrying across physical and metaphysical space. "Grandfather! Your herald is assaulted by something that eats your gifts, something that drinks corruption and remains uncorrupted. Send aid! Send!" The chamber's temperature dropped. Not cooling, something else. The sensation of attention from something vast and terrible, something that had noticed the battle and found it interesting. Nurgle himself was watching, and in the warp, impossibly distant yet pressed against this moment like a curious child watching ants fight, the Plague Father laughed. It was a sound like every illness humanity had ever suffered playing in harmony, coughs and wheezes and death rattles orchestrated into something almost cheerful. Curious. A voice that was rot and love combined echoed through every mind present. A being that consumes corruption without being corrupted. A predator that hunts my children. How delightful. How unexpected. Typhus, my herald. Show me if this vampire is worthy of my personal attention. Show me if he can survive my greatest gifts. Typhus's wounds healed instantly. His power surged, enhanced by direct divine intervention. The Man-Reaper burned with renewed plague fire, and his eyes, those terrible eyes, fixed on Alucard with an expression that married hatred with anticipation. "You wanted to see what a herald could do," Typhus said, his voice now layered with Nurgle's own harmonics. "You wanted to test yourself against chaos. Congratulations. You've earned the Grandfather's direct blessing. Let's see if you're still laughing when I show you what true decay looks like." Alucard stood. Blood still dripping from his mouth. Typhus's blood. Corruption he'd consumed and survived. His body was a wreck, his reserves depleted by over 200,000 souls, his regeneration struggling to keep up with cumulative damage. And he was smiling. "Finally," he said, reloading his weapons with the last of his Phosphex ammunition. "Finally, something that might actually kill me. Crassus, get your people out. This is about to get messy. I'm not leaving you to—" "You're evacuating civilians and providing intelligence to the Inquisition," Alucard interrupted. "That's your mission. This—" He gestured at Typhus, now wreathed in direct divine power. "This is mine. Go. I'll catch up. Or I won't. Either way, make sure Thelm knows what happened here." Crassus hesitated, 3 centuries of brotherhood warring with tactical necessity. Then he nodded sharply. "Kill him, vampire. Kill him for every world he's corrupted, for every soul he's damned, for the Legion he betrayed." "I'll do my best," Alucard said. "Now go, before Nurgle decides civilians are also fair game." The survivors retreated, Crassus covering their withdrawal with disciplined bolter fire. The Poxwalkers tried to pursue, but were cut down by Tyvan and Maris's hellguns, the stormtroopers fighting with the desperate efficiency of soldiers who knew every second mattered. Within 2 minutes, the chamber was clear, except for Alucard and Typhus, Herald and Vampire, Chaos and Defiance, Entropy and the thing that refused to stop existing. "Just us now," Alucard said, his pistols raised. "No witnesses, no interruptions. Just you, me, and whatever passes for honor among beings that eat gods for breakfast." Typhus raised the Man-Reaper in salute, a gesture that carried genuine respect beneath the corruption. "You will make a fine addition to Grandfather's garden," the herald said. "Your corpse will bloom with the most exquisite plagues. Your suffering will nourish 1,000 gardens across 1,000 worlds, and when you finally accept inevitability, when you finally embrace entropy, I will personally welcome you to the Plague Father's love." "Looking forward to disappointing you," Alucard said. They charged simultaneously, and the real fight began. The battle between Herald and Vampire transcended conventional combat. Typhus moved with the certainty of entropy itself. Every strike inevitable, every defense a temporary delay against ultimate decay. The Man-Reaper carved through air and space with equal ease, its blade leaving trails of disease that hung in the atmosphere like poisonous calligraphy. Each swing carried 3 centuries of skill combined with demonic enhancement, backed by Nurgle's direct blessing. Alucard fought like something that had forgotten how to lose. He dodged with margins measured in millimeters, his preternatural reflexes pushed beyond their limits, his body moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. When he couldn't dodge, he took the hits and regenerated through them, burning souls like ammunition, treating his immortality as a tactical resource, rather than an unbreakable shield. The Casol roared, Phosphex rounds tracing burning trajectories toward Typhus's exposed joints. The Herald blocked with his scythe, the blessed ammunition detonating against corrupted metal, chemical fire spreading across Terminator plate, only to be absorbed by demonic resilience. What would have melted normal armor barely scorched Typhus's blessed ceramite. "You're depleting yourself," Typhus observed, his scythe sweeping in a horizontal arc that forced Alucard to drop flat, the blade passing millimeters above his prone form. "I can sense it. Every regeneration costs you. Every moment of survival drains your reserves. How many lives have you burned in the past hour? 300,000? 4? 347,000. Give or take," Alucard admitted, rolling away from a follow-up strike that cratered the floor where he'd been. "But who's counting?" The jackal barked twice, explosive rounds aimed at Typhus's damaged throat. The Herald caught both rounds mid-flight with his free hand, his ceramite gauntlet absorbing impacts that would have shattered concrete. He crushed the rounds, letting Phosphex burn across his palm, and laughed. "Grandfather's gifts make me resilient beyond your comprehension. I have drowned in plague seas and emerged stronger. I have breathed contagions that sterilized worlds. Your ammunition is creative but ultimately futile." "Funny thing about futility," Alucard said, holstering his empty weapons and drawing something else, a combat knife he'd taken from the ship's armory, blessed by ecclesiarchy priests and inscribed with prayers he didn't believe in but appreciated for their practical applications. "It's only futile until it works." He closed the distance, abandoning ranged combat for something more intimate. The knife sought gaps in Typhus's armor with surgical precision, the joints, the seals, the spaces where even Terminator plate had to compromise between protection and mobility. Typhus met him with the Man-Reaper's haft, using the scythe's shaft as a staff, blocking strikes that would have found vulnerabilities. "You fight like an Astartes," the Herald noted with something approaching respect. "Targeting weak points, seeking tactical advantages. Have you fought Space Marines before?" "A few," Alucard said, his knife skating off ceramite as Typhus twisted away. "They died. You're better than them. More experienced, more dangerous." He ducked under a counterstrike that would have separated his head from his shoulders. "But you're also infected. Your enhancements make you powerful but predictable. Nurgle's gifts are generous, but they come with limitations. You move like someone who hasn't feared death in centuries. That makes you sloppy." "Sloppy?" Typhus's voice carried genuine offense. "I am Herald of Nurgle. I have commanded plague fleets across the galaxy. I have personally corrupted 7 worlds. I am inevitability given." Alucard's knife found the gap under Typhus's left arm, the weak point where shoulder joint met torso plating. The blessed blade plunged through corrupted flesh, seeking something vital, finding nerve clusters that even demonic enhancement couldn't completely replace. Typhus's left arm went limp, paralyzed by precise trauma to supernatural biology. The Man-Reaper wavered, suddenly held one-handed, its weight throwing off the Herald's balance. "Sloppy," Alucard repeated, and pressed the advantage. He was on Typhus like a starving animal, his knife working with manic precision, finding every gap, every weakness, every point where armor gave way to flesh. Not killing strikes. He couldn't kill something this resilient quickly, but crippling strikes, systematic dismantlement of a transhuman body. Typhus roared, his good arm swinging the Man-Reaper in wild arcs, trying to force distance. The scythe caught Alucard across the midsection, the blade's plague edge carving through vampire flesh with ease. Alucard's torso came apart, upper and lower halves separating, organs spilling across the diseased floor. He laughed through a throat that was no longer connected to lungs. "Good hit. Felt that one. 7 out of 10 on the dismemberment scale. Let's see if you can do better." His body liquefied, the separated halves flowing together like conscious fluid, reforming faster than Typhus could capitalize on the opening. Within 3 seconds, he was whole again, having burned another 20,000 souls to force regeneration against Nurgle's direct corruption. "How?" Typhus demanded, his composure finally cracking. "You've absorbed enough plague to kill a continent, enough corruption to damn a legion. Why won't you break?" "Because I'm not playing your game," Alucard said, his knife still working, still seeking vulnerabilities. "You want me to despair, to accept that fighting is meaningless, to embrace entropy and join Nurgle's garden. But I don't need meaning. I don't require hope. I just need opponents worth fighting. And as long as you keep providing entertainment, I'll keep regenerating through your best efforts." He found another gap. Typhus's right knee, the joint weakened by earlier bolter damage from Crassus. The blessed knife plunged through ceramite and into flesh, severing tendons, compromising structural integrity. Typhus collapsed to one knee, his massive frame finally showing signs of systemic damage. "This is impossible," the Herald gasped, his regeneration fighting Alucard's consecrated blade. The two supernatural healing factors locked in competition. Grandfather's gifts should be absolute. Decay should be inevitable. You cannot resist entropy itself. "Watch me," Alucard said, and bit into Typhus's throat again. This time he drank deeper, consumed more, pulled harder at the essence that made Typhus a herald rather than merely a corrupted space marine. The plague blood burned worse than before. Nurgle was actively resisting now, trying to protect its servant. But Alucard forced it down anyway, treating divine corruption like particularly spicy wine. Power flooded through him. Not clean power, not pure strength, but something tainted and terrible. He could feel Nurgle's presence in every drop, the Plague Father's love made liquid, corruption that promised rest and peace and an end to struggle. He could also feel something else. Knowledge. Typhus's memories, his experiences, 3 centuries of service to chaos flowing into Alucard's consciousness like unwanted data upload. He saw worlds drowning in plague, populations corrupted through careful cultivation, the artistry of disease made manifest, and he saw weakness. The price Typhus had paid for his power, the parts of himself he'd surrendered to Nurgle's service. The Herald wasn't enhanced, he was hollowed, his original self carved away and filled with demonic presence, a puppet animated by divine will rather than genuine transhuman capability. Alucard released his bite and staggered back, his body racked by conflicting forces, regeneration fighting corruption fighting absorption fighting rejection. His soul reserves were critically depleted. 400,000 lives gone in less than an hour, burned as fuel for survival against odds that should have killed him permanently. But he was still standing, still functional, still himself. Typhus collapsed fully now, his Terminator armor cracking, plague fluids leaking from multiple breaches. His regeneration was failing, unable to cope with cumulative damage combined with having essential essence literally drained away by something that shouldn't be able to consume chaos. You've wounded me, Typhus said, his voice filled with genuine wonder beneath the rot. Truly wounded me. Not just damaged this shell, but hurt the essence Grandfather granted. How? What are you? Hungry, Alucard said simply. And stubborn, and apparently resistant to divine corruption through sheer refusal to participate in your theology. Tell Grandfather Nurgle. He raised his knife, positioning it over Typhus's exposed throat. That I'm coming for all his heralds eventually, one plague prince at a time if necessary. Tell him that entropy isn't inevitable when something refuses to stop existing. You cannot kill me, Typhus said, but his voice carried uncertainty now. I am Herald. Even if you destroy this form, I will reconstitute in the warp, return stronger, hunt you across. I know, Alucard interrupted. That's what makes this fun. You'll come back. We'll fight again. Maybe next time you'll win. Maybe I'll have depleted myself too much, burned too many souls, and you'll finally introduce me to true death. Or maybe I'll consume you completely, absorb everything you are, and become something even chaos fears. Either way. He smiled, blood still staining his teeth. It'll be interesting. The knife descended, but before it could connect, the chamber shifted. Reality bent, warped by massive warp presence, manifesting directly. The diseased floor opened like a mouth, and tentacles, dozens of them, each as thick as a man's torso, erupted from below. The great unclean one that had been lurking beneath finally manifested fully, no longer content to influence from afar. It rose into the chamber like a mountain of rotting flesh, its body a bloated parody of life, covered in lesions that wept plague, supported by legs that should never have held such weight. Its face, if that collection of pustules and exposed bone could be called a face, split into a rictus grin. Little vampire, it said in a voice like every sickness-given speech. Grandfather wishes to preserve his herald. You may not have him. Not yet. Not until you've proven yourself truly worthy. The demon's tentacles wrapped around Typhus, pulling the herald down into the depths, into the warp breach below, spiriting him away before Alucard could deliver the killing strike. Damn it, Alucard said with genuine disappointment. I was so close. The great unclean one laughed, a sound like bubbling sewage mixed with children's giggles. Clothes counts in horseshoes and demons, little vampire. You have amused the grandfather, wounded his herald, survived his greatest plagues. For this you are marked, marked as potential, marked as prey, marked as something worth cultivating. I don't want to be cultivated, Alucard said flatly. What you want is irrelevant. Grandfather's love finds all eventually. Some embrace it quickly, others resist for centuries, but all eventually succumb to entropy. You, little vampire, will be the most delicious when you finally accept inevitability. The daemon began to sink back into the breach, its massive form disappearing into the warp. We will meet again, in gardens yet unplanted, in plagues yet unborn. Until then, survive, little vampire. Survive and grow strong. Grandfather loves a challenge. It vanished, taking Typhus with it, sealing the breach behind them and leaving Alucard alone in the suddenly silent chamber. He stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. He'd fought a Herald of Nurgle to a near-death experience, for both of them. He'd absorbed Herald essence and survived. He'd burned through over 400,000 souls and remained uncorrupted. And Nurgle itself had noticed him, marked him, declared interest. "Well," Alucard said to the empty chamber, his regeneration finally catching up, his body stabilizing, "that could have gone better. But it also could have gone worse." "I'll call it a draw." His Vox collar crackled to life. Thelm's voice came through, tense with barely controlled panic. "Alucard, report. We detected massive warp signatures at your location. Status?" "Typhus is gone. Escaped into the warp with greater demon assistance. The hive is yours to purge or extract as needed. Crassus and his survivors should be topside by now. Mission partial success. I wounded a herald but didn't kill him. Does that count?" Silence. Then, "You wounded a herald of Nurgle." "Significantly. Drained his essence. Made him bleed. Forced Nurgle to personally intervene to save him. So yes, I'd say wounded is accurate." More silence. Alucard could almost hear Thelm recalculating threat assessments, running through implications, trying to process what it meant that his sanctioned vampire had just gone toe-to-toe with a herald and survived. "Extraction Thunderhawk is inbound to your position," Thelm finally said. "We're pulling everyone out. The entire hive is compromised beyond recovery. Cyclonic torpedoes are being prepared for planetary sterilization once we've confirmed all Imperial assets are clear." "Understood. On my way up. Fair warning, I'm depleted. If anything attacks during extraction, I'm basically a very angry mortal with fancy pistols until my reserves regenerate. We'll provide escort. Just get to the surface." "And Alucard?" "Yes?" "You're either the Emperor's greatest gift to the Inquisition, or the Warp's longest con. I honestly can't tell which anymore." "Why not both?" Alucard suggested, and began the long climb back to the surface, leaving Nurgle's violated garden behind him. Deep in the warp, Typhus regenerated in Nurgle's embrace, his body being rebuilt by loving divine attention. The Herald's wounds were terrible, his essence diminished, his pride wounded worse than his flesh. But he was smiling. "Did you see, Grandfather?" he asked the vast presence that surrounded him. "Did you see how he fought? The vampire, the impossible thing? He could be ours, if we're patient, if we cultivate him properly. He could become the greatest plague-bearer ever created." Nurgle's laughter echoed through dimensions. "Patience, my herald. All things rot eventually, even eternity. Especially eternity. We have time. We have forever. And forever is long enough to claim even the most stubborn prey." "As you will, Grandfather," Typhus said, and settled in to heal, to plan, to prepare for the day he would face the vampire again. The extraction was chaos, wrapped in desperate efficiency. Crassus and his survivors had fought their way to the surface, taking casualties the entire ascent. 14 dead, 23 wounded, all of them bearing plague exposure that would require extensive medical quarantine. The Thunderhawk had landed in a maelstrom of defensive fire, its heavy bolters clearing landing zones, while poxwalkers swarmed from every direction, drawn by the promise of fresh meat and the hive mind command to prevent Imperial escape. Alucard emerged from the hive's depths, looking like something that had lost a fight with a meat grinder and decided to walk it off anyway. His coat was shredded beyond recognition. His flesh bore the marks of Nurgle's most concentrated attentions, patches of necrotic tissue that his depleted regeneration couldn't quite eliminate, scars that would have been permanent on anything mortal. His eyes still gleamed with that inhuman red, but behind them was exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue. 412,000 souls. That's what the battle had cost him. Nearly 15% of his total reserves, burned in less than 2 hours of sustained combat against Herald-level opposition. It was the most expensive fight he'd experienced since his final confrontation with the Major and Millennium, back in his home universe, back when he'd still believed there were limits to what could hurt him. This universe kept teaching him otherwise. "Asset, move!" Tyvan's voice cracked across the Vox as the stormtrooper provided covering fire, his hellgun cutting down poxwalkers with methodical precision. "Thunderhawk departs in 60 seconds with or without stragglers." Alucard ran, not with his usual supernatural speed, but with the determination of something that refused to die even when death would be convenient. He vaulted over diseased barricades, his boots splashing through pools of liquid corruption, his body absorbing ambient plague that his weakened state couldn't immediately purge. The Thunderhawk's assault ramp was a beacon of blessed ceramite and sacred promethium exhaust. Crassus stood at its threshold, his bolter barking disciplined fire, providing cover for the final survivors scrambling aboard. The Lord Militant's armor was scorched, cracked, bearing the marks of 3 days holding impossible positions. But he was standing, still fighting, still loyalist, despite everything Nurgle had thrown at him. "Go!" Crassus commanded, physically throwing the last wounded survivor onto the ramp before turning to provide final covering fire. "Pilot, dust off now!" "Lord Militant, you're not aboard!" the pilot started. "I'm coming!" Crassus roared, his bolter magazine running dry, switching to his power sword as poxwalkers reached the ramp. The blessed blade carved through diseased flesh, each stroke a prayer made kinetic, each kill an affirmation that some things were worth dying for. Alucard reached the ramp 3 seconds before it began retracting. He grabbed Crassus's arm with what remained of his strength and pulled, hauling the armored Astartes aboard through sheer bloody-minded refusal to lose another piece after coming this far. They collapsed together onto the Thunderhawk's deck as the assault ramp sealed. The aircraft's engines screamed, lifting off amid a hail of improvised projectiles and plague spores. Through the viewport, the hive fell away, a monument to corruption, a testament to what happened when chaos found fertile ground and 3 days to work. "Extraction successful," the pilot reported, his voice tight with the professionalism of someone who'd just completed an impossible mission. "All surviving Imperial assets aboard. Plague contamination at critical levels. Requesting immediate decontamination protocols upon arrival." In the troop compartment, medics worked with desperate efficiency on the wounded. Of the original 217 survivors, 163 remained alive. The rest had been claimed by the Ascent, by Nurgle's final attempts to prevent their escape, by the simple mathematics of attrition in a plague-saturated environment. 163 souls saved from a world being prepared for exterminatus. The Imperium would call it a victory. Would record Crassus's heroism, Alucard's contributions, the survivors' faith in the face of demonic corruption. They would write it in the records as evidence that the Emperor protects, that resistance matters, that loyalty has value even when surrounded by entropy. They would be lying, but it would be a useful lie. Crassus removed his helmet, revealing features haggard with exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "You came back," he said to Alucard, his voice rough from days of commanding through Vox speakers. "I wasn't certain you would. Wasn't certain you'd survive typhus. The fact that you're here, still alive, still uncorrupted, that's either divine providence or the universe's sickest joke." "Why not both?" Alucard said, the words costing him more effort than they should. "I fought your herald, wounded him, drank his essence, made Nurgle personally intervene to save him from permanent death. I'd call that a win, except they escaped before I could finish the job. So more of a tactical stalemate with interesting implications." "You drank from typhus?" Crassus's expression cycled through disbelief, horror, and something approaching awe. Herald blood. Direct corruption from Nurgle's chosen champion. That should have turned you into a plague zombie or worse. The fact that you're still coherent, still yourself. He stopped, reconsidering. "What am I saying?" You absorbed a bloodletter and survived Slaanesh's attention. Of course you can drink from heralds. You're collecting chaos like trophies. I prefer to think of it as field research, Alucard said. Understanding the enemy through direct consumption. Very thorough, very intimate. Occasionally extremely unpleasant. The Thunderhawk shuddered as it cleared the atmosphere, leaving Thraxia Secundus behind. Through the viewport, the planet was visible as a diseased marble, its surface writhing with Nurgle's transformations. In 6 hours, cyclonic torpedoes would reduce it to molten slag. In 6 days, atmospheric incineration would ensure no biological material survived. In 6 months, Imperial records would list it as lost to chaos, with a warning beacon ensuring no ship ever attempted landing. 800 million souls. Gone. Converted, corrupted, or killed. The price of failure against chaos. 163 saved. The price of success. The mathematics didn't balance, but they never did. Lord Inquisitor, Tyvan reported through VoxLink to the righteous persecution. Extraction complete. Asset is depleted but functional. Lord Militant Crassus is alive and cooperative. Survivors require extensive medical screening but show no advanced corruption. Requesting immediate docking clearance. Thelm's response came through crisp and immediate. Clearance granted. Medical teams standing by. Lord Militant Crassus, you will be debriefed the moment medical clears you for interrogation. Asset Alucard will be confined to quarters until I've reviewed combat data from Witness 13 and determined whether your engagement with Herald Typhus constitutes tactical success or reckless endangerment. Little of both, Alucard admitted. But I brought your Death Guard loyalist back alive. That was the mission objective. Everything else was bonus content. We'll discuss your definition of bonus content when you're recovered, Thelm said, his tone suggesting the discussion would be pointed. Until then, rest, regenerate. Prepare a full report on Typhus's capabilities, vulnerabilities, and current strategic deployment. If we're going to face him again, and we will, I want every scrap of intelligence your consumption provided. The VoxLink severed, leaving the Thunderhawk's interior filled with the sounds of injured survivors, medical equipment, and the low thrumming of engines carrying them toward safety. Crassus watched Alucard for a long moment, his enhanced vision cataloging the vampire's condition with apothecary precision. You're depleted. Genuinely, critically depleted. I can see it in how you move, how you breathe. Whatever reserves fuel your regeneration, you've burned through them at catastrophic rates. 412,000 souls, Alucard said quietly. Give or take. That's what Typhus cost me. The fight, the plague exposure, the Herald essence absorption. Expensive day at the office. And you'd do it again, Crassus said. Not a question. Absolutely, Alucard confirmed. Best fight I've had since arriving in this universe. Typhus is skilled, powerful, genuinely dangerous. He pushed me to my limits, made me work for survival. That's valuable. That's rare. Most opponents either die too quickly or weren't worth fighting in the first place. But a Herald of Chaos? He smiled, despite his exhaustion. That's premium content. That's what I came to this universe to find. You're insane, Crassus said, but there was respect in his voice. Functionally, genuinely insane. But you're also effective. You saved my people. Wounded Typhus badly enough that Nurgle had to personally extract him. That buys the Imperium time, intelligence, and proof that even heralds can bleed. The Inquisition will want to use you, deploy you against other high-value chaos targets. You understand that, right? You've proven yourself valuable. Thelm won't let you remain idle. Good, Alucard said. Idle is boring. I want targets. I want challenges. I want to see how far I can push before the universe pushes back hard enough to actually kill me. If Thelm wants to point me at Chaos Champions, Greater Demons, and Herald-level threats, I'm happy to oblige. Just tell him to make sure the targets are interesting. I didn't survive 5 centuries and cross-dimensional barriers to waste my time on minor heresies. "I'll convey your requirements," Crassus said dryly, "though I suspect the Inquisitor has his own ideas about what constitutes appropriate deployment for a vampire who drinks from heralds." The Thunderhawk docked with the Righteous Persecution, 23 minutes later. Medical teams swarmed the survivors, conducting preliminary screenings for corruption, while tech priests blessed every surface the plague exposed had touched. Severina was there, her chains glowing softly as her warp sight swept across each rescued soul, checking for taint, for demonic hooks, for the subtle signs that Nurgle had claimed them despite their physical survival. When she reached Alucard, she stopped, stared. Her chains rattled with agitation. "You're changed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not corrupted, not tainted, but changed. There's something new in you, something you took from the Herald. I can see it. Fragments of Typhus's essence incorporated into your being, not as corruption, but as information, knowledge. You didn't just wound him. You learned from him." 3 centuries of plaguecraft, Alucard confirmed. Nurgle's tactical doctrine as interpreted by its herald. Methods of corruption, strategies of deployment. The artistry of disease as understood by a being who's devoted his existence to it. It's in my head now, part of what I absorbed. Not pleasant, but useful. "And not corrupting you," Severina said, genuinely baffled. "By every principle of chaos interaction, consuming Herald essence should have claimed you, should have opened you to Nurgle's influence, but you're treating it like acquired skill rather than spiritual contamination. How?" "Because I don't believe in their gods," Alucard said simply. "Chaos thrives on faith, on conviction, on the belief that gods are real and their influence matters. But I'm from a universe where gods are distant at best, absent at worst, where faith is personal choice rather than metaphysical fact. So when I consume demon essence, when I absorb herald knowledge, I process it as data rather than divine truth. It's not conversion, it's education through extremely unpleasant means." Severina looked like she wanted to argue, to explain why that shouldn't work. Why chaos didn't operate on belief alone but on fundamental warp physics. But she'd seen the evidence. Watched through her warp sight as Alucard consumed chaos and remained unchanged. Her theology couldn't explain him, couldn't categorize him, couldn't fit him into any framework that made sense. So she did the only thing she could. Made the sign of the Aquila, and prayed that whatever Alucard was, he remained pointed at the Imperium's enemies rather than becoming one. 3 days later, Alucard stood in the observation deck of the Righteous Persecution, watching through reinforced viewports as cyclonic torpedoes reduced Thraxia Secundus to molten slag. The planet's crust cracked, its mantle exposed, its surface transformed from diseased garden into lifeless rock. 800 million souls erased. Nurgle's work, undone through overwhelming firepower. The Plague Father would return, would find new worlds to corrupt, would send Typhus or other heralds to continue the eternal work of entropy. But for now, this one planet was denied to chaos. One small victory in a war that had raged for millennia and would rage for millennia more. "Admiring your work?" Thelm's voice came from behind him. The Inquisitor had arrived silently, or perhaps Alucard was simply too focused on the planetary destruction to notice. "Admiring the commitment," Alucard said. "You destroy entire worlds rather than risk corruption spreading. Billions dead to prevent trillions suffering. The mathematics are harsh but consistent. I can respect that, even if I can't agree with it." "Agreement isn't required," Thelm said, moving to stand beside him. "Only compliance. Which brings me to your next assignment. The intelligence Crassus provided has been analyzed. We've identified 3 potential herald deployments across the sector. 1 Cornate, 1 Tsinchian, 1 additional Nurglite. High-value targets, all of them. The kind that require specialized resources to eliminate. And you want me to hunt them, Alucard said. I want you to prove that your success against Typhus wasn't luck, Thelm corrected. I want evidence that you can consistently engage Herald-level threats without corruption. I want to know if you're a weapon the Inquisition can deploy repeatedly or a disaster that got fortunate once. Fair assessment, Alucard admitted. So which Herald do I get first? Thelm pulled up a data slate, its screen showing dossiers on 3 different Chaos Champions. Your choice. Select your target. Plan your approach. I'll provide tactical support, but the engagement is yours. Succeed, and you've earned continued deployment against high-value threats. Fail, and... He gestured toward the dying planet below. We ensure your failure doesn't spread. Alucard studied the 3 dossiers with genuine interest. A cornate berserker lord who'd claimed 12 worlds through sheer violence. A Tsienchian sorcerer who could rewrite reality with a thought. A Nurglite plague marine who'd turned entire systems into disease incubators. All of them Herald level. All of them dangerous. All of them exactly what he'd been hoping to find. I'll take the sorcerer, Alucard decided. Magic is bullshit, but at least it's interesting bullshit. When do we deploy? 5 days, Thelm said. That gives you time to regenerate your reserves, review intelligence, and prepare for engagement with an opponent who can bend reality. Are you certain? Tsienchian corruption is the most insidious. It doesn't attack your body or your will, it attacks your perception. Makes you question what's real, convinces you that your choices were always leading to their design. Sounds like a challenge, Alucard said with a smile. Which means it's exactly what I'm here for. 5 days to prepare? Perfect. That's enough time to refill my reserves and contemplate what it means to fight someone who sees causality as a suggestion rather than a law. Thelm nodded, the gesture carrying weight. Very well. 5 days. Then we hunt a herald of Tzeentch. Emperor preserve us both. He left, and Alucard remained in the observation deck, watching Thraxia Secundus die. Below him in the ship's brig, where his quarters waited, servants were already preparing for his return. Above him, in the warp, 4 chaos gods turned their attention toward this vampire who had wounded one of their heralds and emerged uncorrupted. Khorne contemplated tests of strength. Nurgle planned long-term cultivation. Slaanesh nursed its wounded pride and plotted revenge. And Tzeentch wove schemes that branched into possibilities, calculating odds, preparing traps that might catch this unpredictable variable. The game continued. The pieces moved. And Alucard, standing alone in the observation deck with stars burning cold and distant around him, smiled into the darkness. 5 days until the next fight, he whispered to no one and everything. 5 days until I find out if Tzeentch's reality warping can actually kill me. Either way, his eyes gleamed with anticipation. It's going to be fascinating. The Emperor's light burned distant and cold. The warp pressed against reality like breath against glass. And in the space between, a vampire who had crossed dimensions continued his hunt through a universe that provided exactly what he'd always wanted. Worthy opponents, genuine challenges, and the sweet uncertainty of not knowing if the next fight would be his last. The 41st millennium had gained a new predator, and chaos was beginning to notice. In the endless dark of the 41st millennium, where there is only war and hope is the cruelest joke the universe tells, something impossible had arrived. Not a hero. Heroes died too easily here, ground to paste between the jaws of chaos and the machinery of the Imperium's survival. Not a savior. Salvation implied an ending, and this nightmare had no ending, only intervals between catastrophes. Just a predator. An ancient, tired, endlessly hungry predator who had found a hunting ground worthy of his attention. Alucard walked the corridors of the righteous persecution with the easy confidence of something that had stopped fearing death centuries ago. Around him, crew members averted their eyes, made signs of the Aquila, whispered prayers that the monster remained pointed outward rather than turning its attention inward. They didn't understand him. They never would. But they understood that he killed things that needed killing, and in the 41st millennium, that was enough. Inquisitor Thelm sat in his private chambers, reviewing combat data for the 50th time, trying to understand what he'd unleashed. A vampire that consumed chaos without being corrupted. A weapon that grew stronger by devouring the enemy. A variable that every tactical projection suggested should be impossible but functionally, demonstrably, worked. He would deploy it again. Point it at the next herald, the next greater demon, the next threat that made conventional warfare seem insufficient. He would use it until it broke, or succeeded beyond all reasonable expectations, or revealed itself to be the most elaborate chaos corruption ever conceived. That was his duty. That was his burden. That was what it meant to be an Inquisitor. To make the choices that damned your soul so that humanity might survive another day. And deep in the warp, where gods played games with pieces made from souls and suffering, 4 chaos powers contemplated this new variable. This vampire who treated their heralds as challenges rather than doom. This predator who consumed corruption and spat it back as defiance. They would test him further, send greater threats, escalate until either he broke or revealed what he truly was beneath the theatrical arrogance and supernatural resilience. Because in the end, nothing remained uncorrupted forever. Nothing resisted entropy eternally. Even the Emperor, mightiest of all, sat imprisoned on his throne, dying by inches across 10,000 years. What chance did one vampire have against the infinite patience of chaos? But Alucard didn't think in terms of chance or probability. He thought in terms of the next fight, the next challenge, the next moment of genuine uncertainty about whether he would survive. And as long as the 41st millennium continued providing those moments, he would continue hunting. Not for the Imperium's glory, not for humanity's survival, not for any grand purpose or noble cause, simply because anything else would be boring, and boredom, for something that had existed as long as he had, was the only true death. The stars burned cold. The warp churned with malevolent hunger, and somewhere between material and immaterial, a vampire who had crossed dimensions smiled and prepared for the next hunt. The universe had provided him with gods to antagonize, with heralds to consume, with an endless parade of worthy opponents in a war that would never end. He could hardly wait to see what came next.